376 AD, 4270 AM, the Visigoths learned about the fall of the Ostrogoths and swelling of the Hun ranks with Gothic soldiers. The entire nation fled and 1,000,000 panicking Visigoths lined the banks of the Danube River, which marked the Roman frontier. Other historians claim Fritigern led 80,000 Goths and Alans to the Danube and Emperor Valens allowed them to cross, but once conditions were met, these were quickly followed by another 80,000 people, the Gruthungi, who had been forbidden to enter beforehand. The Visigoths entering Roman territory were ordered to turn in their weapons, and for the most part large weapons were turned in. They even provided the children of their Gothic leaders as security to Roman officials, but many Visigoths played to the corruption of the Roman border officials and bribed them to keep their weapons. Because of the destitute conditions of the Goths, the Romans found a perfect market for old foodstuffs that were sold at exorbitant prices. Many Goths were sickened from the tainted food, and others were enraged at the criminal prices the Romans subjected them to. The census of Goths cannot be known. So many passed into Roman territory that the Romans lost count and quit trying. Riots broke out against the Roman officials, and soon so many hordes were crossing the Danube that all semblance of order was gone. From this date onward, the Western Goths, Visigoths, would be a significant force in Europe, even settling into a nation. This year saw a significant population shift in the demographics of the Roman Empire. These people were descendants of Israelites, but the Roman legions were already thoroughly German, Teutonic, Gallic, Celtic, all ancestrally kin to the Goths. The prophecy that Israel would become God's battle axe was being fulfilled. 1. Invaders of Rome. 2. The end of empire. 378 AD, 4272 AM. Through mismanagement and avarice, the Roman officials trying to bleed the desperate Goths escaping the Huns over the Danube, the borders were opened wide with riots, skirmishes and chaos as the Gothic masses filtered into the Roman world. The entire region was looted and the Goths took cattle and water sources, and many even retaliated against the Romans. Emperor Valens with a Roman army went to quell the revolt, and at Adrianople, the Visigothic commander Fritigern learned that the Gothic cavalry was superior to the Roman army. The Goths wore heavy armour and Goths used stirrups, and this greatly aided the power behind their lances, allowing them to mow through the Roman lines. These Goths were the forerunners of the European knight. Other nations rode bareback or with light padded saddles. At Adrianople, the Gothic cavalry forced the Roman army into a press so tight they could not wield their weapons. The Romans were cut down, 40,000 men dying, the news of this defeat sending shockwaves throughout the empire. Other historians claim it was 20,000 killed out of 30,000. Marcellinus wrote that 2/3 of the Roman soldiers were killed. In this year the Pope in Rome assumed the title Pontifex Maximus, which was formerly reserved only for Roman emperors. About this year, according to Jerome, quote, "From India to Britain all nations resound with the death and resurrection of Christ," unquote. An interesting year in calendrics. This was 1728 years before Armageddon, and 5616 years of the Anunnaki chronology. It was 4416 years of the orbital chronology, and 690 years, 138 times 5. Also in 378 AD, Valens, Roman emperor, enters into a peace treaty with Persia and marched 600 miles back to Antioch in Syria. As his soldiers departed Antioch, they happened upon an unnerving sight. A man was lying in the road, wide-eyed, alive, but covered in deep welts, as if he had been whipped from head to toe. Though he did not speak, his eyes were alive with vitality and haunted the men. Emperor Valens was summoned, and it was hardly believable that such a man was alive, but the brightness of his eyes showed life. Then the mysterious figure disappeared, and experts on the interpretations of omens declared that this man symbolized Rome, the empire continually beaten like a dying man, according to Zosimus. The Goths were blood descendants of the Cimmerians, Samarians, that were deported from Israel in 745 BC and transplanted into the region of Asia between the Black and Caspian Seas. These people were descendants of Jacob, who had died 2016 years earlier, in 1639 BC. This year of the Gothic entry into Roman civilization was also 1380 years, 138 times 10, after the throne of David was founded in 1003 BC, and it was 108 years after the Gothic kingdom split into the Ostrogoths of the east and Visigoths of the west in 270 AD. 1. Invaders of Rome. 3. The night Attila died. 4. The end of empire. 5. Ammianus Marcellinus, Book 31. 6. The Gospel Truth. 7. St. Paul in Britain. 8. The end of empire. 382 AD, 4276 AM. Emperor Theodosius entered into a treaty with the Visigoths, giving them the devastated Balkan regions they had laid waste. Almost all Visigothic males of military age joined the Roman army. Interestingly, over 980 years earlier, the ancient German peoples settled the Balkans after escaping from the Assyria domains, where the 10 tribes of Israel had been deported. 1. The invaders of Rome. 383 AD, 4277 AM. Jerome finished his Latin translation of the Holy Scriptures. In his preface to the 4 Gospels he wrote, quote, "You urge me to revise the old Latin version, and, as it were, to sit in judgment on the copies of the Scriptures which are now scattered throughout the whole world, and, since they differ from one another, you would have me decide which of them agree with the Greek original. The labour is one of love, but at the same time both perilous and presumptuous." Unquote. This was 350 years after the 33 AD crucifixion event. 1. History in quotations. 384 AD, 4278 AM. Planet Phoenix passed through the inner solar system, completing its 138 years orbit. There are no records that it was seen. Pope Siricius of Rome initiated the Roman papal practice of issuing decrees, commands to be obeyed by other bishops. 1. The Jesus Papers. 389 AD, 4283 AM. Christians led by the Patriarch Theophilus destroyed the Serapeum in Alexandria, Egypt, which contained a library that had inherited many of the old texts once stored in the Library of Alexandria. Emperor Theodosius had the Sibylline books burned again, the ancient prophecies of the Greek Sibyl that was of old said to be of Hebrew origin. Though the books of the Sibyl had been destroyed before, they were reconstructed from the copies spread abroad. 1. Elder Gods in Antiquity. 390 AD, 4284 AM. Throughout the Roman Empire, the book burnings continued. The bishops received permission from the Roman Emperor, and the scheme was approved by all as a method of eliminating opposition to the official Church of Rome. With the completion of Jerome's Latin version of the Bible, agents of the Church had to destroy all other versions that varied from the official Gospel story. Emperor Theodosius the Great had the great statue of Jupiter Serapis at Alexandria destroyed. This was 1800 years, 600 times 3, after the Israelites conquered Lower Syria in 1411 BC. 1. Our Sun God. 2. A Short History of the World. 393 AD, 4287 AM. The Synod of Hippo in northern Africa convened to officially recognise the 27 books of the New Testament. They did not select a canon at this time, which had already been done, but merely recognised the 27 books already amassed that comprised the New Testament. The canon was fixed at this time under the leadership of Pope Siricius. Interestingly, this synod was the first to accept the Apocalypse or Book of Revelation, though the Synod of Aix in 789 AD would remove it 396 years later. This 396 is half of 792 years, the orbit of Nibiru. Recall that the Apocalypse, which concerns the return of Nibiru, see Anunnaki homeworld, is dated at 96 AD, when Nibiru was at Aphelion, furthest distance from the Sun. Theodosius I is said to be Rome's first Christian emperor. In this year he abolished the Olympic Games, which had been uninterrupted for 1170 years. 1. A Quest for Answers. 2. The Jesus Papers. 3. History of the First Council of Nice. 394 AD, 4288 AM. Egyptian hieroglyphic writing was virtually extinct. In this year the last hieroglyphic record was made on a wall of the Temple of Philae, the night Attila died. 395 AD, 4289 AM. Theodosius I died and the Visigoths rebelled, electing as king a Visigothic commander named Alaric, who was 30 years old. The invaders of Rome. 396 AD, 4290 AM. Senator Q. Aurelius Symmachus composed a new edition of Livy's first 10 books on the history of Rome. It was this edition that preserved Livy's writings for us through the Dark Ages. 1. Livy, Early History of Rome, R. M. Ogilvie translation, Salincourt. 397 AD, 4291 AM. At the Council of Carthage under the direction of Siricius of Rome occurred the second ratification of the New Testament books. 1. The Jesus Papers, the Gospel Truth. 400 AD, 4294 AM. A comet blazed across the sky, heading west according to Roman writers and Chinese records. Alaric, ruler of the Visigoths, noted this comet as an omen to conquer the western frontiers of Rome. Also in this year were several eclipses of the moon. Alaric attacked Rome in this year but was repelled. This was the 444th year of the Roman Julian calendar that began in 45 BC. 1. The invaders of Rome. 2. Tracing our ancestors. 402 AD, 4296 AM. During the gladiatorial games in Rome, where criminals, slaves and prisoners of war and political dissidents were pitted against wild animals and armed gladiators for the entertainment of the people, a monk named Telemachus became enraged and jumped into the arena. He ran and put himself between two swordsmen, loudly protesting against the inhuman savagery. But the crowds, enraged, stoned Telemachus to death. Emperor Honorius, a Christian, upon hearing of the stoning, forbade any more gladiatorial games. His decision ended about 600 years of Roman butchery. The Bishop of Constantinople, named Chrysostom, wrote that by this date Britain was a Christian nation, where men were of the habit of debating scripture. Very prominent calendrics for this year. 1. The invaders of Rome. 2. St. Paul in Britain. 406 AD, 4300 AM. The Vandals and Alans crossed the Rhine River in December, entering Gaul, according to Prosper of Aquitaine. Pope Innocent I strove at this time to centralize all Christian power and authority at Rome in order to make the Pope the ultimate authority over all Christendom. 1. The Jesus Papers. 408 AD, 4302 AM. Many Romans were disturbed over the increasing Germanization of the Roman legions and military culture. Fed up with German generals in the army who failed to protect Roman interests, the Romans took the opportunity to massacre 30,000 German wives and children of legionnaires, while their fathers, brothers, sons and husbands were far away on the Roman frontier, fighting for Rome against other Germans. Upon hearing about the genocide of their families, these Germans turned against Rome and joined the ranks of Alaric the Goth, leader of the Visigoths, as he again marched on the Eternal City. In this year Uldin led the Huns deeper into Roman territory. 1. The invaders of Rome. 2. The end of empire. 410 AD, 4304 AM. Exactly 66 years before the final fall of Rome by the Germans in 476 AD, on a night in August at midnight, the Salarian Gate of Rome was opened, and Alaric led the Visigoths in the sack of Rome. This being 800 years after the Gauls sacked Rome and occupied it in 390 BC. Alaric had the Pergamon library in Rome destroyed, which had been founded over 600 years earlier by Attila the Hun in Asia Minor. The immense library, over 200,000 texts, was brought to Rome in 133 BC. After sacking Rome's wealth and treasures, the Visigoths loaded many ships intending to sail to northern Africa. Suddenly a violent storm ruined the ships and Alaric lost the treasures, the priceless artefacts Rome had stolen from dozens of nations, and hundreds of cities sank to the bottom of the Mediterranean. Astonished at his misfortune, Alaric deliberated on what to do when he was suddenly the victim of an untimely death. The sack of Rome humbled Augustine, inspiring him to write City of God. He marvelled that the Visigoths, in their pillage of the Eternal City, did not touch a single Christian shrine, church or sanctuary, leaving none looted. He marvelled over this, but the real mystery is why he was surprised. The Visigoths had plunged into Christianity with more fervour than any Romans had ever experienced. The Visigoths had legitimate grievances with Rome. They were Christians and far from the pagans the Roman authors of the time would have later progeny believe. He wrote that, quote, "The thing itself which is now called the Christian religion really was known among the ancients, nor was it wanting from any time in the beginning of the human race until the time of Christ came in the flesh, from whence came the true religion which had previously existed," unquote. Augustine marvelled at how many Christian churches were already in Britain. After the sack of Rome, the British had received word from Rome that the Romans could be of no more help to them in their plight against the Picts, the Scots, other Celts and Saxons that were even at this early date raiding the coasts in fleets. This was year marked the end of official Roman presence in Britain. Concerning the ancient existence of giants, in City of God Augustine wrote, quote, "The large size of the primitive human body is often proved to the incredulous by the exposure of sepulchres, either through the wear of time or the violence of torrents or some accident, and in which bones of incredible size have been found. Though the bodies of ordinary men were much larger than ours, the giants surpassed all in stature. The bones which are from time to time discovered prove the size of the bodies of the ancients." Unquote. 1. Elder gods in antiquity. 2. The night Attila died. 3. Aryan sun myths. 4. St. Paul in Britain. 5. The invaders of Rome. 6. Augustine, City of God, Book 15. 412 AD, 4306 AM. Construction begins on the massive Theodosian walls around Constantinople, ancient Byzantium. These fortifications would protect the city from enemies for exactly 792 years, until the Fourth Crusade in 1204 AD, when the Venetians scaled its walls. 1. The end of empire. 413 AD, 4307 AM. The Theodosian walls around Constantinople are completed. They would be scaled in 792 years by the Venetians in 1204 AD, but not destroyed. However, they would be ruined by cannon fire and destroyed in 1453 by the Turks, or in 1040 years, 520 plus 520, 1. The end of empire. 414 AD, 4308 AM. The Jews are expelled from Alexandria, Egypt. The last time the Jews were purged from Alexandria was at the revolts led by Lucullus in 115-116 AD. This year was 476 years since Rome annexed Judea in 63 BC. 1. March of the Titans. 415 AD, 4309 AM. Christian Archbishop Kirill of Alexandria had the Alexandrian library raided and texts of science, mathematics, geography, histories, metaphysics and those deemed contrary to the doctrines of Christianity were destroyed. Agents of Kirill incited a mob and Alexandrian scholars were abducted and flayed alive with oyster shells. The greatest female philosopher of all time, Hypatia of Alexandria, fell victim to the religious zealots, the mob grabbing her from her chariot, stripping her naked and beating her almost senseless before they scraped her flesh off with oyster shells. She was murdered inside a church. Hypatia was famous in her own lifetime for her achievements, commentaries, writings and oratory. She was the torch of the Neoplatonic school and a well-sought intellectual whose opinions carried much weight among the learned. Her position on Christianity was positive, but she offended church officials by revealing its antiquity, gaining for an enemy the Archbishop Kirill. By all accounts, he was indirectly responsible for her death. 1. Atlantis in America. 2. The secret teachings of all ages. 416 AD, 4310 AM. According to Orosius, by this time the Christian churches of Europe and the Mediterranean were full of Huns, Suevi, Vandals, Burgundians, and other Scythians. 1. Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, Volume 4. 418 AD, 4312 AM. By treaty with Rome, the Visigoths settled in France and founded a kingdom in the southwest of Gaul, Aquitaine. After sacking Rome in 410 AD, the Visigoths were feared. By this time, many Huns had completely adopted Visigothic culture and were virtually indistinguishable from them. The founding of the Gothic kingdom in Gaul, which would emerge as the nation of France, was exactly 148 years after the Visigoths separated from the Ostrogoths in 270 AD. This 148 years being 1776 months, highly prophetic of the founding of the Anglo-Saxon French Empire in the West in 1776 AD, the United States of America. 1. The end of empire. 420 AD, 4314 AM. A Christian bishop named Abdas, fully expecting to die, burned down a Zoroastrian temple in the Persian province of Khuzestan. The ruler, Yazdgerd I, previously tolerant of Christianity for 20 years, changed his policy and now had Christians executed when they had refused to rebuild the burned temple. 1. The end of empire. 420 AD, 4315 AM. Bahram V succeeded his father, Yazdgerd I of Persia, and intensified the persecution of Christians throughout the Persian realm. Emperor Theodosius invaded Mesopotamia in what was the first Roman military action in defense of Christianity. 422 AD, 4316 AM. During the war between Constantinople and Persia, some 100,000 Arabs on their way to fight on the side of the Persians were the victims of something most unusual. They had been seized with panic, and in their terror they had thrown themselves into the Euphrates River. With indecisive victories, a peace was concluded between the Roman and Persian empires. While the bulk of the Roman forces were in the east, the Huns crossed the Danube and invaded Thrace, laying it waste. This was the 930th year of the Republic of Rome, since 509 BC, and 700 years after the Celts invaded Thrace and the Roman territories and Macedonia in 279 BC. 1. The end of empire. 423 AD, 4317 AM. Emperor Theodosius passes another edict prohibiting non-Christian beliefs, making exile and state confiscation of all property the punishment for anti-Christian sentiment. Priorly, in 399, he had prohibited observation of the mysteries, cults, paganism, and all pre-Christian beliefs. 1. Freemasonry and its ancient mystic rites. 426 AD. 4320 AM. The Germanic people called the Angles began invading Britain. This is how the country obtained the later name of England. This year, as 4320 Annus Mundi, is 1080 times 4, the sum of 1080 being the calendrical seal of Israel. The Great Pyramid, finished in 1080 AM, 2815 BC, was 3240 years, 1080 times 3, before the Angle invasion. This was also 1836 years, 108 times 17, after the Israelites invaded Lower Syria and settled it in 1411 BC. This was a further 144 times 13 years, 1872, after the Exodus in 1447 BC. The Angles were descended from the tribes of Israel in migration. This was exactly 50 years before the fall of Rome in 476 BC. 1. A short history of the world. 429 AD, 4323 AM. The Vandals overran Roman-occupied northern Africa. This was exactly 630 years, half of 1260, or 70 times 9 years, after 202 BC, when the Romans invaded northern Africa. 430 AD, 4324 AM. The uncle of Attila the Hun, named Oktar, tried to take the Huns further west by attacking the Burgundians in modern southwestern Germany. Fearing the Huns, the Burgundians, those not yet Romanized, sought the aid of God. Knowing of the God of the Christians, one they knew was regarded by the Romans, and they reasoned must be powerful. The Burgundians had French Visigothic Christians baptized them. The nation converted to this new god and then marched against the Huns, 3,000 Burgundians against a greater host, and they slaughtered about 10,000 Huns. Because of this victory, the Burgundians became a Christian people. The writer Sidonius Apollinaris described the Burgundians as on average 7 foot tall. Sidonius was a Gallic aristocrat and bishop. 1. The end of empire. 2. History in quotations. 431 AD, 4325 AM. The Christian Council of Ephesus is convened. Riots broke out during the heated discussions that resulted in violent deaths. 1. The Christ Conspiracy. 433 AD, 4327 AM. The Council of Ephesus reconvened, and it was proclaimed that Mary was the Mother of God. Perhaps this was the reason why there had been violent outbursts and murders at the council in 431. 1. The Gospel Truth. 434 AD, 4328 AM. The Huns invaded Thrace again, devastating everything, and moved toward Constantinople. But for unknown reasons the Huns withdrew. A Hun commander named Rua had died, and it was rumoured by Christians in Constantinople that their deliverance was divine, that lightning, fireballs and plague had afflicted the Huns. This was precisely 700 years after the Heruli of southern Russia invaded south, like the Huns, all the way to the Peloponnesus in 267 BC. 1. The end of empire. 437 AD, 4331 AM. A Roman-Hun allied force defeats the Burgundians, but the Huns go further than conquering and attempt to exterminate them. At this time there was extreme Hunnic animosity against the Burgundians. 1. The end of empire. 439 AD, 4333 AM. Gaiseric leads the Vandals in a fleet from Spain and attacks Carthage, the last Roman stronghold in northern Africa, taking it. They destroyed the Roman occupation forces, the library, and then began the construction of a mighty navy. One contemporary historian wrote that it had been 585 years since the Romans took Carthage. This parallels the 585 BC year that Jerusalem fell to Babylon. This was exactly 600 years after Rome sacked Carthage in the Second Punic War in 162 BC, and 540 years, half of 1080, after the Romans defeated the Teutones in Gaul in 102 BC. 1. The end of empire. 441 AD, 4335 AM. A chronicle of Gaul written at this date relates that by this time the Isles of Britain had already been run over by the Saxons from the continent. While many invasion fleets no doubt touched down in Britain by this time, the main hosts of the Saxons had not yet begun their mass migrations. This was 432 years, half of 864, after 9 AD, when the Saxon leader Hermann defeated the Roman legions at the Battle of Teutoburg Forest. 1. Ancient Mysteries. 442 AD, 4336 AM. The Huns spent 9 months destroying the cities and people of the Middle Danube and Morava river valley. Cities and villages were burned, men slaughtered, children enslaved, and women taken as second wives and concubines, as well as all livestock. The terror of the Huns struck to the heart of the Roman Empire. At this time, Pope Leo I widely publicised the false doctrine that Christ gave supreme authority over the Church to Peter, and that there was a direct succession from Peter to the papacy, that the Bishop of Rome, now called Pope, was the greatest of all Christian bishops. These Hun invasions were 720 years after 279 BC, when the Gauls were invading the Greek world. This was also 666 years after 225 BC, when the Celts marched against Rome and were slaughtered. This was the 70th year since the Huns first invaded Roman territory in 372 AD. 1. The Jesus Papers. 447 AD, 4341 AM. Theodosius II of Constantinople was nothing like his father, Theodosius the Great. An effeminate coward, He had the walls of Constantinople added to with great towers in an effort to avoid open battle with Attila the Hun. But this security was shattered by an earthquake that destroyed the walls and felled 57 towers. Panicked, the people repaired the walls in 60 days, but the Huns were far away, unable to take advantage of the lack of defences. 1. The night Attila died. 448 AD, 4342 AM. Annals of Ulster in Ireland record that an earthquake this year felled 57 of the truly ancient round towers in the region, mysterious pre-Christian structures erected by the Tuatha De Danann. The Chronicle of Annals states that 75 towers fell. The fact that these structures fell at all is indicative of the magnitude of this earthquake, for the round towers antedate the written records of Ireland. 1. The antediluvian world. 2. Lost seas of Atlantis, ancient Europe and the Mediterranean. 450 AD, 4344 AM. This year is 1860 years, 186 times 10, after the Israelites invaded Lower Syria in 1411 BC, and 204 years after the Goths invaded Dacia in 246 AD. The calendrics for this year indicate a very important event that could have occurred in the Americas or the Far East. 451 AD, 4345 AM. Emperor Valentinian III of Rome was despised by his sister Honoria. Attempting to harm him, she sent Attila the Hun a marriage invitation and her own ring as proof. This was done to prompt Attila to attack the West and Rome, to claim Honoria as his bride and receive half the empire. Valentinian discovered the intrigue, locked Honoria inside a tower where she vanished from the historical record. Attila invaded the West demanding his bride. After destroying no less than 70 cities in the Balkans and receiving payoffs from Emperor Theodosius, Attila invaded the West and nearly overran every town in northern Gaul. In the Battle of Catalaunian Plain, near Troyes, a confederation of Franks, Visigoths and Roman imperial forces opposed the Huns in a contest of mutual slaughter, resulting in the deaths of between 150,000 and 300,000 men. The Huns then retreated to the Hungarian plain of Europe, the momentum of their invasion broken. This was exactly 666 years after 216 BC, when the Gauls, Franks, with Hannibal and the Carthaginians, defeated the Romans in the Battle of Cannae. This was also 612 years after Rome invaded North Africa in 162 BC, and 552 years after 102 BC, when the Romans fought against the Germans in Gaul, France. 1. The night Attila died. 2. A short history of the world. 452 AD, 4346 AM. Attila the Hun regrouped and again pushed into deeper Roman territory, this time invading northern Italy, destroying Aquileia, Padua, and he even looted Milan. This year ended the reign of terror of the Huns. Attila retreated back and the Huns did not again become a threat, but thoroughly assimilated with other peoples, or, as many did, founded their own kingdom, Hungary. This was the year 960 of the Roman Republic since 509 BC. 1. A short history of the world. 453 AD, 4347 AM. Attila the Hun died, probably poisoned by Edecon, a Germano-Hun, who may have exacted his revenge for Attila's murder of a friend. Edecon was the father of the famous Odovacar, the German, who conquered Rome in 476 AD. Attila was not the barbaric savage painted by historians. He was born and raised in Europe. His uncles were Oktar and Rua, both leaders of the Huns. Like the Hunnish invaders, he was brutal and violent, but there was nothing primitive about him or the Huns. Their greatest folly was in not keeping historical records. As descendants of Israelites and masters of assimilation, the Huns became as European as any others. Much of the Hun population drifted about and were absorbed into the many German families throughout Europe. From the death of Attila to the final fall of Rome, there ruled 10 emperors in Rome, and every one of them was appointed by the Vandals and other Germans. The Huns were the final, the 10th kingdom that would emerge at the fall of Rome, in accordance with the ancient prophecies. C. 476 AD. 1. The night Attila died. 2. The end of empire. 3. A short history of the world. 454 AD, 4348 AM. An intense revolt of Germans of different tribes rose up against the Huns that had been exercising authority over them all along the banks of the Nedao River. This confederation of Germans slaughtered over 30,000 Huns. This was 720 years after the Heruli invaded Lower Europe in 267 BC, and this was 38 Jubilees, 38 times 50, after the Israelites fled Egypt in the Exodus in 1447 BC, the end of empire. 455 AD, 4349 AM. The Vandals now lived at Carthage, and the region of northern Africa, after having ousted the Romans and subjugated those that stayed. Gaiseric now leads them against Rome, and as they approach, Emperor Valentinian III is murdered. The Vandals sack the city. The Vandals become masters over the islands formerly subjected under Rome: Sicily, Corsica, Sardinia, and other Mediterranean islands. We are informed that the Vandals took the 7-branched candlestick from Rome, the same that the Romans took from Jerusalem in 70 AD, when Titus destroyed the temple and built the Arch of Titus in Rome. The relic was taken to Carthage. This invasion of Rome was exactly 600 years after the Romans crossed the Mediterranean in 146 BC and conquered Carthage. A short history of the world. 460 AD, 4354 AM. The Romans planned on a massive attack against the Vandals in North Africa. The sack of Rome did not end the Roman Empire. The administration of the Roman military was too spread abroad for the fall of the city to have any real effect. But the Vandals learned of the planned naval invasion and captured the refitted troop transports of the Romans, thwarting their intended invasion. This was 666 years after the Romans defeated the North African Carthaginians in a battle in 207 BC. This same 666 years measures the time from 207 BC, when Emperor Huang Ti of China died and the Age of Warring States began, and 460 AD, signifying that perhaps something monumental occurred in 460 AD China. This is reinforced by the fact that 460 AD was exactly 1656 years after the Chinese calendar began in 1197 BC. The end of empire. 462 AD, 4356 AM. The Anunnaki planet Nibiru enters the inner solar system after 732 years below the ecliptic, far out into the Kuiper belt, starting at 60 years over the ecliptic. No records that it was seen. 468 AD, 4362 AM. Rome invades Vandal-occupied North Africa and Carthage, but the invasion was called off when the Vandals destroyed the Roman fleet anchored off Carthage with fire ships. The end of empire. 470 AD, 4364 AM. This year concludes the 9th Mayan Baktun of the Long Count, began in 3113 BC, thus being 1,296,000 days, or 144,000 times 9 days. Other calendrics indicate something occurred related to Semitic people or the descendants of Israel. 471 AD, 4365 AM. The Council of Ephesus in this year, attended by many bishops, changed the ancient Ephesian goddess Artemis, Diana, of the famously old temple to the Virgin Mother Mary, the Knights Templar in the New World. 472 AD, 4366 AM. The dark satellite passes through the inner solar system, a former moon of Nibiru that almost collided into Earth in 713 BC, altering the planet's orbit, changing the solar year from 360 days to 365.25. Its 395-year orbit has now fallen out of sync with the Mayan long count. 475 AD, 4369 AM. The great statue of Olympian Jove, Jupiter, Zeus, made by Phidias, was destroyed in a fire in Constantinople. This was the deity borrowed and venerated by the Romans, a superstitious people, many of whom later said that the ruin of the statue foreshadowed the ruin of Rome in the following year. One Nostradamus to complete prophecies. 476 AD, 4370 AM. This is the year of the fall of Rome. Odovacar, Odoacer in Latin, leads the Germans against Rome, he being the German son of Edecon, the German Hun right-hand man of Attila the Hun, who some believe was responsible for Attila's death. The legions by this date were largely full of Romanized Germans. The invasion and takeover of Rome was not like the attacks in earlier years, like 410 and 455 AD, but the full overthrowing of Roman government. This took place in the 1229th year of Rome, and in the year 1229 BC occurred the fall of Troy, the ancestors of the Romans. At this time the Anno Domini did not exist, but once employed this year became the year 476 AD, a number linked to Israel over and over in the chronology of the world. Rome's founding in 753 BC began with a boy king named Romulus, and at the fall of Rome the Germans defeated the boy emperor Romulus Augustulus. Edecon spared the life of the young Romulus and sent him to live with his mother near Naples. Odovacar became king of Rome, and he gave the regent Euric, king of the Visigoths, all the Roman territories beyond the Alps as far as the ocean. King Euric then formed a loose confederation of European kingdoms in this inherited landmass from Rome of the Visigoths, Heruli, Saxons, Burgundians, Franks, Vandals, Ostrogoths of Pannonia, and Huns. By 485 AD, this northern kingdom of Euric was established, Euric being the father of the famous Alaric. The calendrics for this year identify interactions between Rome and the ancient descendants of Israel. The White Huns in 76 AD invaded northern India, initiating the Saka calendar, this being 400 years before the kin of the Huns, the Germans, took Rome. The history of early Rome involved the rape of the Sabines in 749 BC, exactly 1224 years, half of 2448, before 476 AD, and at the precise midpoint of this 1224-year period was the year 137 BC, when the Celtiberians of Spain in Numantia defeated the Romans, the Celts of Iberia being direct descendants of Phoenician Hebrew peoples. 476 AD was 700 years after the tribes of Cisalpine Gaul assembled and invaded Rome in 225 BC, where at the Battle of Telamon 40,000 Celts were killed. The fall of Rome was 864 years after 389 BC, when the Gauls occupied Rome after having sacked the city. The people of Italy had early on taken in the blood of Esau through Zepho, and then from the assimilation of an Edomite population that migrated to Italia. Rome's anti-Israelite, anti-Jewish and anti-Christian history is a reflection of the anti-Jacob personality of Esau. Rome invested with the spirit of Esau from the founding of Rome in 753 BC, all the way through its fall in 476 AD, and beyond through the building and rise of the Roman Catholic Church, even to modern times in the 21st century. The fall of Rome was exactly a great year, 600 years after Judea defeated Idumea, Edom, and forced the Edomites to convert to Judaism, an event known in biblical prophecy as the marrying of Edom. Jerusalem's problems with the Romans only occurred after Judea took in their enemies, the Edomites. The Great Pyramid was finished in 1080 Annus Mundi, 2815 BC, the sum of 1080 being Israel's calendrical seal and number of Sethite inheritance. The fall of Rome in 476 AD was the 1080th year of Daniel's prophecy of the four empires, the 1080 years beginning in 605 BC, when King Nabopolassar of the Chaldean dynasty of Babylon died and was succeeded by his son, the famous Nebuchadnezzar II. Nebuchadnezzar dreams of the four-empire statue of gold, silver, brass and iron, or Babylon, Persia, Media, Macedon, Greece, and Rome. In that year of 605 BC, the Israelites on the Assyrian frontier were freed, and they founded a state and city called Aria. the origin of the term Aryan. This was exactly 540 years, half of 1080, to the year 65 BC, when the Romans under Pompey defeated Tigranes of Armenia, and the Romans acquired as territories Mesopotamia, Syria, and Phoenicia, all of Judea falling under Rome. Judea would be formally annexed in 63 BC. Counting 540 years after 65 BC was the year 476 AD, when the distant kin of Judea, the descendants of the ancient Israelites now called Germans, Yermani, conquered the Iron Empire. In the prophecy of Daniel, the empire of Rome ended with 10 toes of iron mixed with miry clay, meaning 10 kingdoms having Roman culture but different blood. The fall of Rome was by the Romanized Germans of the 10 kingdoms of Europe in 476 AD. The 10 toes are an extension of the culture of Rome through 10 distinct sovereign peoples. We now defer to the erudition of Joseph S. Van Dyke, who in 1871 AD wrote, quote, "Nor are the prophecies mere isolated predictions of disconnected events. The portraiture of the future given by the prophets is like the vivid description of a landscape viewed from a commanding eminence." Unquote. Van Dyke published the opinion that the researchers even in his day believed that Daniel's prophecy concerned 10 kingdoms that would arise out of the ashes of the Roman Empire, and that these 10 kingdoms, according to Daniel's prediction, quote, "shall not cleave one to another," unquote, meaning that the 10 kingdoms will never become one consolidated empire in Europe, unquote, as history has clearly demonstrated. Never has all of Europe been ruled under one empire. The historian and philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli wrote that the 10 kingdoms after the fall of Rome were Lombards, Longbeards, the Franks, Gauls, Burgundians, Ostrogoths, Visigoths, Vandals, Heruli, Suevi, the Saxons, and the Huns. Amazingly, Machiavelli left no hint in his books The Art of War, The Prince, or The Discourses that he was aware of the prophecy of Daniel and its connection to these 10 kingdoms, or to the historical fact that these same 10 peoples were descended from the ancient Israelites. The 10 kingdoms in Europe would later provide progeny that 1300 years later would found the prophesied Empire of Ephraim, the United States of America in 1776 AD, Empire of Adoption, founded by 13 colonies in North America, where the archaic 13 clans of the Mayan originated. These 13 colonies mirror the 13 tribes of Israel, the 12 tribes plus Joseph, Manasseh, and Ephraim who were adopted in Egypt. The United States of America fulfills many prophecies that will be reviewed under 1776 AD. During this time, the Saxons of Germany continued to raid Britain and invade in fleets. The Anglo-Saxon scholar Bede wrote that by this time there were 7 Saxon kings over Britain, and that Britain had now been ruled by 2 Saxons, a Jute and 4 Angles. The new culture was called the Engaish, after the Angles. The Saxons invaded the west, leaving the continent to sail west to Britain and settle the new lands as conquerors. Concerning the tribe of Joseph called Ephraim and Manasseh, which was also a designation for prophetic Israel as a collection of all the tribes, we read in Deuteronomy, quote, "His horns are like the horns of unicorns. With them he shall push the people together to the ends of the earth, and they are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and they are the thousands of Manasseh." Deuteronomy. The Gauls, Celts, Visigoths, then Ostrogoths, the Vandals, the Cimbri, Teutones, all these peoples travelled westward from Asia into the Roman world, and lastly the Huns, who pushed these peoples further west. This prophecy relates that the progeny of Ephraim would be more populous than Manasseh, and the peoples descended from both will continually migrate and move until they are settled at the ends of the earth, the far west. Genesis reads that because Joseph was separated from his brothers, he would receive the greatest blessings of the earth. Quote, "By the Almighty who shall bless thee with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lieth under, blessings of the breasts and of the womb, the blessings of thy father have prevailed above the blessings of my progenitors unto the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, unquote. Genesis and Deuteronomy. The prophet Samuel wrote, quote, Moreover, I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them, that they may dwell in a place of their own, unquote. Samuel. Isaiah wrote, quote, For the Lord will have mercy on Jacob, and will yet choose Israel, and set them in their own land. And the strangers shall be joined to them, and they shall cleave to the house of Jacob, unquote. Isaiah. Quote, Behold, thou shalt call a nation that thou knowest not, and the nations that knew not thee shall run unto thee because of the Lord thy God, and for the Holy One of Israel, unquote. Isaiah. Quote, In an acceptable time I have heard thee, and I will preserve thee, and give thee a covenant of the people, to establish the earth, to cause to inherit the desolate heritages, unquote. Isaiah. These prophecies reveal that the kingdoms that would arise out of Israel would be at the edge of the earth, which at those times was the far west, Europe, a landmass named after a Phoenician princess. These lands would be desolate when Israel came to occupy them and separated from the other families of men. But Manasseh and Ephraim would be further separated from the other Israelite descended families even more. This was Britain, Ireland, Wales and Scotland, which were prophetically identified as Manasseh. But Ephraim's destiny was even greater. Ephraim would be in the far west, in a land of blessings, more populated than Manasseh, and further separated from all other Israelite peoples. Ephraim would become the land of North America. The fall of Rome in 476 AD was a pivotal period in human history that totally altered the course of events. The collapse of Roman government and civilization was a double-edged sword that gave rise to the greatest enemy of the Western world, the papacy. The weakening of Roman civil power actually strengthened the position of the Roman religious authority, the Pope actually acquiring the powers of a king and later an emperor over the kings of Europe. The emergence of this threat to freedom of thought and expression was not ignored in biblical prophecy. In Daniel's prophecy of the 10 kingdoms after the fall of the Iron Empire, Rome, we learn of the appearance on the world stage of a king of a different kind. Quote, And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall arise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand, until a time and times and the dividing of a time. Daniel. This king is different because he represents a religious kingdom that will oppress the civil kingdoms of the 10 kings. 3 kings will fall to him, known as the Papal States, and for 1260 years he will oppress the nations of Europe. He will claim to be the vicar of Christ, to be infallible, to be able to forgive sin, to have authority to dole out indulgences to the people, to be the Word of God. The papacy, as will be seen in the history of Europe in Chronicon 2, will be the greatest enemy the European powers have ever known, a fact little known today because of the heroic efforts of the Roman Catholic Church in destroying the evidences of its criminal past. With Chronicon 1 complete, chronicling the histories between 5239 BC and 476 AD, the history of the world bears out several remarkable facts that are here listed in this conclusion. 1. The night Attila died. 2. Decline and fall of the Roman Empire. 3. Popery, foe of the Church. 5. National Sunday laws. Conclusion. The unfolding of major events in history is interconnected within a matrix of timelines moored together within the golden proportion. Our solar system was once a binary system with 2 luminaries, both having orbiting planets. One star collapsed into a dark star, and the history of Earth's ages is one of disasters caused by the debris from fragmented worlds coming into contact with our planet. Earth's present position in orbit around the Sun, between the orbital belts of Venus and Mars, was not Earth's original position nor orbit. The human race was not the first sentient life form on Earth. Homo sapiens sapiens was bioengineered by beings known to the ancients as Anunnaki, who were subservient to an unknown creator. Visitors from another world came to the Earth and aided mankind's early development, visiting at least once, known anciently as Anunnaki. A definitive 6,000-year period was known to the ancients, a timeline when the chief cornerstone, Saviour, would destroy mankind's creators and oppressors, the Anunnaki, in 2106 AD. Planet Phoenix orbits every 138 years perpendicular to the ecliptic, and was known to the ancients who feared its appearance and attendant global cataclysm. Phoenix will return in May of 2040 AD, and is the subject of When the Sun Darkens and Nostradamus and the Planets of Apocalypse. Planet Nibiru of the Anunnaki orbits every 792 years perpendicular to the ecliptic, feared by the ancients like Phoenix and for the same reasons. Nibiru will return in June-July of 2046 AD to push Earth off its present orbital path, changing the length of the day and year, the subject of Anunnaki Homeworld and Nostradamus and the Planets of Apocalypse. The dark satellite, a former metallic and rocky moon of Nibiru, will return in 2052 AD in its fixed 395-year orbit and bring the seven kings of the Anunnaki to our planet. This is the subject of Descent of the Seven Kings. The apocalypse, or prophecies of the end of the world, were known throughout the ancient world in the most distant past, and have survived despite the many cultural modifications. The Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt represents on Earth the presence of the chief cornerstone, the builders Anunnaki rejected in their designs, the unseen and most high God, a deity that will deliver mankind from their oppressive and deceitful masters. The importance of the Old Testament annals and prophecies concerning Israel are all the more comprehensible when taking into consideration the histories of Phoenicia, Syria, Asia Minor, Greece, Northern Africa, the central and northern regions of Asia, and all of Europe, all the way to the British Isles and the Americas. The identity of the descendants of the Western Semitic people, known as Israelites, has been traced directly to all those peoples now occupying, or those who had founded the European and North American nations. The narratives of the Old Testament records concerning the strife between Jacob, Israel, and his brother Esau was prophetic and remains to this day experienced worldwide on both religious and racial levels. Chronicon 2 covers the year 477 AD to 2106 AD and will demonstrate that the descendants of Israel are the victims of an international, premeditated race war specifically designed to keep them from discovering who they are. By 476 AD, the Israelite-descended nations had already lost sight of their pedigree, but the prophets foretold that in the last days the Israelites would wake up and realize that they are the blood descendants of tribes of ancient Israel. Chronicon 1 Bibliography. The Jesus Papers, Exposing the Greatest Cover-Up in History, Michael Blagent, 2006, Harper San Francisco. Christ, the Power and the Passion, John Van Auken, 2004, ARE Press. The Christ Conspiracy, The Greatest Story Ever Sold, Arcadia S. 1999, Adventures Unlimited. Pirates and the Lost Templar Fleet, David Hatcher Childress, 2003, Adventures Unlimited. The Golden Treasury of Patristic Quotations, from 50 to 750 AD, compiled by I.D.E. Thomas, 1996, Hearthstone Press. History in Quotations, reflecting 5,000 years in world history, M.J. Cohen and John Major, Castle. The Albigensian Heresy, Reverend H.J. Warner, 1922-2007, Booktree. Survivors in Atlantis, Frank Joseph, 2004, Bear & Co. Technology of the Gods, The Incredible Sciences of the Ancients, David Hatcher Childress, 2000, Adventures Unlimited. The Aryan Race, Charles Morris, 1888, Chicago, S.C. Griggs & Co. Celtic Myths and Legends, T.W. Rolleston, 1917-1990, Dover. Atlantis and the Kingdom of the Neanderthals, Colin Wilson, 2006, Bear & Co. The Gospel Truth, The Heresy of History, Alexander S. Holub, Ph.D., 2004, Bridger House Pub. March of the Titans, A History of the White Race, Arthur Kemp, 2006, The Barnes Review. The Nature of Asatru, Mark Puryear, Universe Inc. History of the First Council of Nice, Dean Dudley, 1925, Booktree reprint, 1999. The Evolution of the Idea of God, Grant Allen, 1897, Booktree. Simon Magus, His Philosophy and Teachings, G.R.S. Mead, 1892, Booktree, 2003. The Holy Tablets, Dr. Malachi Z. York, The Holy Tabernacle. Cosmic Codes, Chuck Missler, Koinonia House. The Orion Prophecy, Patrick Gerrell and Gina Ratink, Adventures Unlimited. The Science Times Book of Natural Disasters, edited Nicholas Wade, 2000, Alliance Press. Extraterrestrials in Biblical Prophecy, G. Cope Shellhorn. A Hitchhiker's Guide to Armageddon, David Hatcher Childress, Adventures Unlimited. Rule by Secrecy, Jim Mars, Perennial. The Knights Templar in the New World, William F. Mann, 2004, Destiny. Symbols, Sex and the Stars, Ernest Busenbach, reprint Booktree. Lost Language of Symbolism 2, Harold Bailey, Booktree reprint. The 33 Strategies of War, Robert Greene, Viking. The First Genesis, The Saga of Creation v. Evolution, William Dankenbring, Triumph. Evolution Cruncher, Vance Ferrell, Evolution Facts, Inc. Zoroastrianism, John W. Waterhouse, 1934, Booktree reprint. The Origin and Evolution of Religion, Albert Churchward, 1924, Booktree reprint. The Fountainhead of Religion, Ganga Prasad, 1927, Booktree reprint. Caesar Against the Celts, Ramon L. Jimenez, 2001, Castle. Historical Deception, The Untold Story of Ancient Egypt, Mustafa Gagala, 1999, Tehuti Research Foundation. Alexander the Great, Robin Lane Fox, Penguin. Stolen Legacy, George G. M. James, 1954, reprint 2001, African American Images. The Mayan Prophecies for 2012, Gerald Benedict, 2009, Watkins, London. Introduction to Comets, John C. Brandt and Robert Chapman, 2004, Cambridge University Press. The Lost Treasure of King Juba, Frank Joseph, 2003, Bear & Co. The Return of the Serpents of Wisdom, Mark Amaru Pinkham, 1997, Adventures Unlimited. A Quest for Answers, The Da Vinci Code, Josh McDowell, 2006, Green Key Books. The End of Empire, Attila the Hun and the Fall of Rome, Christopher Kelly, 2009, W. W. Norton & Co. Sargon the Magnificent, Mrs. Sidney Bristow, The Assassination of the Covenant People. Fingerprints of the Gods, Graham Hancock, 1995, Mandarin. Mahabharata, C. Rajagopalachari, 1983, Bharatiya Bhavan. The Decline of the West, Oswald Spengler, an abridged edition by Helmut Werner, 1991. Hyperspace, Michio Kaku, 1994, Anchor Books, Oxford University Press. Four Witnesses, The Early Church in Her Own Words, Rod Bennett, 2002, Ignatius Press. The City of God, St. Augustine, translated Marcus Dodd, 2009, Hendrickson Pub. The Bible Fraud, Tony Bushby, 2001, The Pacific Blue Group. Egypt, Child of Atlantis, John Gordon, 1997, Bear & Co. New Worlds in the Cosmos, The Discovery of Exoplanets, Michel Mayer and Pierre-Yves Frey, Cambridge University Press. The Gods of Eden, William Brambley Avon. The Genesis Race, Will Hart, Bear & Co. Odyssey of the Gods, Eric von Daniken, Element 2000. Our Haunted Planet, John Keel, 1971. Glade Press, reprint Booktree, 2002. Elder Gods in Antiquity, M. Don Sean, Ozark Mountain. Humanity's Extraterrestrial Origins, Dr. Arthur David Horn with Lynette Ann Mallory Horn, 1994, Silber Schnorr. Flying Serpents and Dragons, Rene Andrew Booley, 1990, Booktree. When Time Began, Zechariah Sitchin, Avon. The Wars of Gods and Men, Zechariah Sitchin, Avon. The Lost Realms, Zechariah Sitchin, Avon. God's Laughter, Man in His Cosmos, Gerald Stagun, translated from German by Steve Lake and Caroline Marl, Aaron Asher Books, HarperCollins, 1990-1992. The Energy Grid, Bruce Cathy, Adventures Unlimited. Hesiod Theogony, translated Dorothea Wendo, Penguin. Natural History, Pliny the Elder, translated John F. Healy, Penguin. Lucretius on the Nature of the Universe, translated Ronald Melville, Oxford World Classics. Pindar the Odes, translator C. M. Bowra, Penguin. Atrahasis, translator Albert T. Clay, 1922, Booktree reprint. Enuma Elish, Seven Tablets of Creation, Volume 1 and 2, L. W. King, 1902, Booktree reprint. Iliad, Homer, translator Ennis Reeves, Barnes and Noble. Tales from Ovid, translated from Metamorphosis by Ted Hughes, Farrar, Straus Giroux. The Great Pyramid Decoded, E. Raymond Capt, Hoffman Printing, 1978. The Great Pyramid, Its Divine Message, D. Davidson and H. Aldersmith, 12th edition, 1924, Booktree. The Origin and Significance of the Great Pyramid, C. Snelland Wake, 1882, Reeves and Turner, reprint by Booktree. Voyages of the Pyramid Builders, Robert Schoch and Robert McNally, Tarcher, Putnam. Lost Scriptures of Giza, Jason M. Breshears, 2006, Booktree. When the Sun Darkens, Orbital History and 2040 AD, Return of Planet Phoenix, Jason M. Breshears, 2009, Booktree. Anunnaki Homeworld, Orbital History and 2046 AD, Return of Planet Nibiru, Jason M. Breshears, 2011, Booktree. Lost Cities and Ancient Mysteries of Africa and Arabia, David Hatcher Childress, Adventures Unlimited. Lost Cities of Atlantis, Ancient Europe and the Mediterranean, David Hatcher Childress, Adventures Unlimited. Ancient Mysteries, Peter James and Nick Thorpe, Ballantyne. The Destruction of Atlantis, Frank Joseph, Bear & Co. Ancient Man, Handbook of Puzzling Artifacts, William Corliss, Sourcebook Project. Atlantis, Mother of Empires, Robert B. Stacey Judd, 1939, Adventures Unlimited. Atlantis, The Antediluvian World, Ignatius Donnelly and Egerton Sykes, Kessinger, reprinted Booktree. Atlantis in America, Navigators of the Ancient World, Ivar Zapp and George Erickson, Adventures Unlimited. Secret Cities of Old South America, Harold T. Wilkins, 1952, Adventures Unlimited. The Histories, Cornelius Tacitus, translated Alfred Church and William Brodrib, Penguin. Annals of Imperial Rome, Tacitus, translated Michael Grant, Penguin. The Later Roman Empire, Ammianus Marcellinus, translator Walter Hamilton, Penguin. Ages in Chaos, Volume 1, From the Exodus to King Akhenaton, Immanuel Velikovsky, 1952, reprint 2009, Paradigma. Saxons, Vikings and Celts, The Genetic Roots of Britain and Ireland, 2006, Brian Sykes. A History of Civilization, Volume 1, Prehistory to 1715, 6th edition, Brinton Christopher, Wolfe Winks, Prentice Hall, 1984. The Assyrians and Babylonians, History and Treasures of an Ancient Civilization, Alfredo Ritzer, White Star Pub. The Poison King, The Life and Legend of Mithridates, Adrienne Mayer, 2009, Uncontested Advance Proof, Princeton University Press. The Naked Olympics, The True Story of the Ancient Games, Tony Perotte, 2004, Random House Trade. The Origins of Greek Civilization, Chester C. Starr, 1961, 1991, W. W. Norton and Co. Phoenicians, Glenn E. Marco, 2000, University of California Press. Alexandria, Jewel of Egypt, Jean-Yves Empereur. Translator, Jane Brenton, Discoveries, Abrams, 2001. Alexander of Macedon, A Historical Biography, Peter Green, University of California. Children of the Sun, A Study of the Egyptian Settlement of the Pacific, W. J. Perry, 1923, Booktree reprint, 2004. Atlantis in America, Lewis Spence, 1925, reprint, Booktree. Ancient Civilizations, Greenhaven Press. Egypt, Greece and Rome, Charles Freeman, Oxford University Press. Civilization or Barbarism, Cheek Anta Diop, Lawrence Hill Books. The Round Towers of Atlantis, Henry O'Brien, 1834, Adventures Unlimited. Cataclysm, Compelling Evidence of a Cosmic Catastrophe in 9500 BC, D.S. Allen and J.B. Dallaire, Bear & Co. The Philosopher and the Druid, A Journey Among the Ancient Celts, Philip Freeman, Simon & Schuster. From the Ashes of Angels, Forbidden Legacy of a Fallen Race, Andrew Collins, Bear & Co. The Murder of Tutankhamun, Bob Bryant, G. P. Putnam's Sons. The Histories, Herodotus, translator Aubrey D. Selincourt. Revised John Marincola, Penguin. The Early History of Rome, Livy, translator Aubrey D. Selincourt, Penguin. Tracing Our Ancestors, Frederick Haberman, Covenant. The Incredible Discovery of Noah's Ark, Charles E. Sellier and David Bolstiger, 1995, Dell Pub. Antiquities of the Jews, Flavius Josephus, translator 1736, William Whiston, Hendrickson Pub. Great Disasters, Reader's Digest S. Edited Carrie Ward, 1989. The End of Eden, The Comet That Changed Civilization, Graham Phillips, 2007, Bear & Co. Cicero on Government, Marcus Tullius Cicero, translator Michael Grant Penguin. The Post-Captivity Names of Israel, Reverend Pasco Gord, 1989, Artisan. Secrets of Time, Stephen Jones, God's Kingdom Ministries. The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, 1776. Edward Gibbon, 6 volumes, Every Man's Library. A Short History of the World, H. G. Wells, Booktree reprint. The Dragon Legacy, The Secret History of an Ancient Bloodline, Nicolau de Vere, Booktree. The Secret in the Bible, Tony Bushby, Joshua Books. Jesus Goes to Hollywood, The Alternative Theories About Christ, William Brambley, Dartlin and Associates. Human Accomplishment, Charles Murray, 2003, Perennial. Wars That Changed the World, Charles Messenger, 2008, Quercus Pub. History of the Christian Religion to the Year 200, Charles B. Waite, C.V. Waite and Co., 1900, 5th edition, 6th printing, 1992. 1421, The Year China Discovered America, Gavin Menzies, Harper Perennial. The Night Attila Died, Solving the Murder of Attila the Hun, Michael A. Babcock, 2005, Berkeley Publishing Group. The Invaders of Rome, Bern Keating, 1966, G. P. Putnam's Sons. The God Kings of Outremer, Hugh Montgomery, 2008, Booktree. The God Kings of Europe, Hugh Montgomery, 2006, Booktree. St. Paul in Britain, R. W. Morgan, 1860, Hoffman, 1984, Artisan. Jesus, God, Man or Myth, Herbert Kuttner, 1950, reprint 2000, Booktree. The Discoverers, A History of Man's Search to Know His World and Himself, Daniel J. Burstein, 1983, vintage. The End of Days, Armageddon and Prophecies of the Return, Zechariah Sitchin, 2006, William Morrow. Apocalypse 2012, An Investigation into Civilization's End, Lawrence E. Joseph, 2007, Broadway Books. Today, Tomorrow and the Great Beyond, John S. Fox, Association of the Covenant People, Prophets of Doom, Damel Cohen, The Hillbrook Press, Early Man and the Cosmos, Evan Haddingham, Walker & Co. Aryan Sun Myths, The Origins of Religion, Sarah Elizabeth Titcomb, 1899, reprint Book Tree. Celtic Myth and Legend, Charles Squire, New Page Books. Ancient Egypt, Light of the World, Volume 1 and 2, Gerald Massey, reprint Black Classic Press. The Greek Myth, Robert Graves, Penguin. Primitive Mythology, Masks of God, Joseph Campbell, 1959-1991, Penguin Compass. Gerald Massey's Lectures, Gerald Massey, 1900, reprint Book Tree. The Oxford Illustrated Companion to World Mythology, David Leeming, 2008, Tess Press. Cosmos of the Ancients, Stefan Stenud, 2007, Book Surge. Our Sun God, Christianity Before Christ, John Denham Parsons, 1895, 2007, reprint Book Tree. Tales of the Prophets, Great Books of the Islamic World, Muhammad ibn Allah al-Qisai, translator W. M. Thaxton, Jr., Great Books of the Islamic World. Secret Teachings of All Ages, Manly P. Hall, Philosophical Research Society. The Secret Doctrine, Helen P. Blavatsky, 1888, Quest. Commentaries on the Occult Philosophy of Agrippa, Willi Schroeder, Samuel Weiser. 3 Books of Occult Philosophy, Henry Cornelius Agrippa, 16th Century Annotator Donald Tyson, Llewellyn. Mysticism, A Study and an Anthology, F. C. Happold, 1963, Penguin. The Story of Astrology, Manly P. Hall, Philosophical Research Society. The Magus, A Complete System of Occult Philosophy, Volume 1 and 2, Francis Barrett, 1801, Book Tree reprint. Fallen Angels and the Origins of Evil, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, Summit University. Gog and Magog, The Giants of Guildhall, F. W. Fairholt, London, John Camden, Houghton, Piccadilly, 1859, reprint Book Tree. The Nag Hammadi Library, Definitive Translation of the Gnostic Scriptures, James M. Robinson, Harper, San Francisco. The Wisdom of the Knowing Ones, Manly P. Hall, Philosophical Research Society. The Stones and the Scarlet Thread, Bonnie Gaunt, Gaunt. Beginnings, The Sacred Dane, Bonnie Gaunt Adventures Limited. Time and the Bible's Number Code, Bonnie Gaunt, Gaunt. Dialogues of Plato, Jowett translation, edited J. D. Kaplan, 1955, Pocket Library. The Discourses, Niccolo Machiavelli, Penguin. Kybalion, 3 Initiates, 1912, Book Tree reprint. The Story of Philosophy, Will Durant, 1926-2006, Pocket Books. The Book of Enoch, translator Richard Lawrence, Artisan. The Book of Jesher, translator Albinus Alcuin, 800 AD, Book Tree reprint. The Book of Jubilees, translator Rev. George H. Shodde, Artisan. Apocalypse of Baruch, Destiny. The Archco volume, translated Drs. McIntosh and Twyman, Book Tree reprint. Lost Books of the Bible and Forgotten Books of Eden, World Bible Publishers. Morals and Dogma of the Ancient and Accepted Rite of Freemasonry, Albert Pike, 1880s, 33rd. New Vision Pub, LLC, 2004 reprint. Freemasonry and its Ancient Mystic Rites, C. W. Leadbeater, 1926, Gramercy, 1986. Origin and Evolution of Freemasonry, Albert Churchward, 1920, Book Tree reprint. Mysteries and Magic, John and Ann Spencer, TV Books, NY. Nostradamus, The Complete Prophecies for the Future, Mario Reading, 2006, Watkins Pub, London. Our Cosmic Ancestors, Morris Chatelaine, Temple of Golden Pub. Journeys to the Mythical Past, Zechariah Sitchin, 2007, Bear & Co. Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid, Bonnie Gaunt. Window on the Universe, Gaunt. The Great Pyramid, Its Secrets and Mysteries Revealed, Piazzi Smythe, 1880, Bell Pub, NY. 1990 version reprinted from 1978 Outlet Book Company. Original published by W. Isbister, London, under title Our Inheritance in the Great Pyramid, 1880. The Portable Voltaire, edited Ben Ray Redman, 1968, Penguin. America and Great Britain, Our Identity Revealed, William Dankenbring, Triumph. The 48 Laws of Power, Robert Greene, 1998, Viking. Life as We Do Not Know It, Peter Ward, 2005, Viking. The Lost Years of Jesus, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, 1984, Summit University Press. The World's Most Mysterious Objects, Lionel Patricia Fanthorpe, 2002, Dundurn. Secret Places of the Lion, George Hunt Williamson, Destiny. The Bible is History, Werner Keller, Bantam. Feats and Wisdom of the Ancients, Library of Curious and Unusual Facts, Time Life. The Stone Angle, John 1. Sacred Number and the Origins of Civilization, Richard Heath, Inner Traditions, 2007. Nature Worship, Ted St. Rain, 1929, reprint Booktree. The Rosicrucian Cosmoconception, The Spear of Destiny, Northern Mysteries and Magic. Planet in Rebellion. Popery, Foe of the Church, Joseph S. Van Dyke, 1871, Booktree reprint. Chronicon, Archive 4, Dark and Middle Ages, 477 to 1433 CE. 956 years covered in 324 date entries in 66 pages. Original research unpublished. All rights reserved. Jason M. Bresciers, 2017. 477 AD, 4371 AM. With the fall of the Roman Empire the year before in 476 AD, the international transcontinental and administrative machine of the Roman government continues to fall apart. As slaves find themselves free, debtors discover that their creditors have no more power over them, people are not forced to remain on the lands they tend, and many people exact their revenge against their former masters. The immense slave populations disperse, and the kingdoms and countries emerge where once Roman provinces were governed. But the freedom came with great cost. The collapse of Roman civilization brought the widespread end of literacy, and in Rome the rise of the religious power of the Church, in tandem with the fall of the secular power of Rome, brought about the Dark Ages period over Europe and the Mediterranean world. The new overlords of the vast territories of the former empire were the German kings, the 10 kings of biblical prophecy, the Lombards, Longbeards, Franks, Burgundians, Ostrogoths, Visigoths, Vandals, Heruli, Suevi, Huns, and Saxons. The Israelite-descended peoples were themselves ending centuries-long migratory periods, and had no standard written languages, unlike their long-settled Celtic kin, the Gauls. Many of these German peoples would later adopt the Romanced languages of French, Spanish or Italian, and Portuguese, Port of Gaul. The Israelitish descendants in this year were settling new lands under new government, 10 kingdoms being formed out of the ashes of Rome. Interestingly, in 1407 BC, the 10 tribes and other Israelites settled into Canaan and became a nation, and this year is 1407 years after Israel and Judah split into the 2 kingdoms, in 931 BC, starting the divided kingdom chronology. Further, the Romans were descendants of the Trojans, and Troy fell in 1229 BC, this being the 1229th year from the founding of Rome, in 753 BC. 1. National Sunday Laws. 481 AD, 4375 AM. King Clovis I ascended to the Frankish throne. He would found the Frankish Empire. He was the son of the Frankish king Childeric I, and Clovis established the Merovingian dynasty over the Franks. The Merovingians ruled over the Franks by right of ancient bloodline. They were known by their long hair, and their tribal symbol was a great spear. The Merovingians believed themselves to be the blood descendants of King Solomon of Israel. While this may have been state propaganda, the Merovingians were indeed related to the people of Pontus, being descendants of Benjamites of Israel. They were also related to the Franks and had priorly lived in Germany and Greece. Their dynastic emblem was that of the fish and lion, some believing it was the Lion of Judah. The Merovingian dynasty actually began with the grandfather of Clovis I, named Merovius, Childeric I being his son. Clovis I literally begins the history of the French. 1. March of the Titans. 2. The Spear of Destiny. 3. The Dragon Legacy. 4. Rule by Secrecy. 488 AD, 4382 AM. Theodoric leads the Goths into Italy in a military migration campaign, the Italians and Romans now realising how futile their hopes are in the renewal of the empire. 1. The End of Empire. 490 AD, 4384 AM. With Italy secure, Theodoric settles the Goth families in the country from aged parents to little children, all with livestock and personal property. Their train of luggage was so immense that it is recorded that in their travels they only lost 2,000 wagons. The Germans under Odovacar attempted to oppose the Goths, but they were beaten in a series of battles as the Goths penetrated the Alps into Italy. This invasion of Italy is calendarically linked to two events in history involving the cursed Earth system of 414-year epochs. This was 1242 years from the founding of Rome in 753 BC, and 414 years after the White Huns invaded northern India and the Saka calendar began, the Huns blood related to the ancient migrating Israelites. Also in this year, the Chinese scholar Zhu Chongzi calculated pi at 3.141596, or 3.1415927, the most accurate estimate made up to this time. This is further evidence of the brilliance of the Chinese mind, an intellect hampered by a culture that has incessantly opposed progress. 1. Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, Volume 4. 2. Human Accomplishment. 493 AD, 4387 AM. Agents of Theodoric, king of the Ostrogoths in Italy, killed Odovacar, the German who had conquered Rome in 476 AD. He was assassinated at a banquet. Theodoric is made king over all Goths throughout Italy, a force of 200,000 men, not including women and children. 1. Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, Volume 4. 495 AD, 4389 AM. Pope Gelasius I boldly wrote the new emperor, Theodoric, and told him that there were two powers in the earth, the secular Roman governmental power now administered by Theodoric, and the spiritual power of the papacy of Rome. Pope Gelasius then went on to inform Theodoric that the papal power was the greater of the two. In the synod in May of this same year, the Pope assumed the title Vicar of Christ. The rise of the papacy was the chief contributing power that caused the Dark Ages and its continuance. 1. The Jesus Papers. 496 AD, 4390 AM. The Burgundians were known as the Alemanni and were the fiercest people in Europe. They invaded Gaul, and the Franks led by Clovis I, a Merovingian king, lead the defence of the realm. The Franks were forced to retreat, but Clovis counterattacked and killed the leader of the Alemanni, defeating them. The Franks extended their own kingdom by annexing all the realms of the Alemanni, their Gallic holdings. Clovis I, third Merovingian king, converts to Christianity, and the Franks then become a Christian nation, ancient France. This year was 1944 years after the Exodus in 1447 BC, or 108 times 18 years, and 1080 years after the fall of Judah in 585 BC. This was 720 years after the ancestors of the Franks in 225 BC were slaughtered by the Romans in the Battle of Telamon. In this final year of Pope Gelasius of Rome, he produced the first list of officially prohibited books, those damned by the Roman Church. 1. The Merovingian Mythos, Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, Volume 4. 2. The Decline of the West. 3. The Mask of Nostradamus. 499 AD, 4393 AM. In this year, a Buddhist priest returning from a land that was 8,000 nautical miles east of China, calling this faraway land Fusang. His story was entered into the Chinese annals, and his descriptions of geography, people, plants and animals matched those of Central America. 503 AD, 4397 AM. For 1080 years, the Irish kings had been crowned upon Lia Fale, known as the Stone of Destiny, an ancestral relic stone believed to be that rock brought to the Isles by migrating Israelites in antiquity. A coronation stone said to date from the life of Jacob, Israel. The Scottish King of Argyll moved the stone from Ireland to Scotland in this year, his name being Kenneth MacAlpin. He began a dynasty of Scottish kings that would last until 1286 AD, ending with Robert the Bruce, whose grandson Robert II would begin the Stuart dynasty. It was believed that the Lia Fáil was brought to ancient Ireland about 583 BC by a Hebrew prophet escorting a Judahite princess. 1. Saxons, Vikings and Celts. 2. Today, tomorrow and the great beyond. 506 AD, 4400 AM. Under Anastasius seated at Constantinople, the New Testament books and writings of the Church Fathers were edited and retouched, the originals destroyed. 1. The Christ Conspiracy. 507 AD, 4401 AM. Clovis I of the Franks attacks the Goths, led by Alaric, 10 miles outside of Poitiers, after a flaming meteor was seen suspended in the sky. This Frankish invasion of Gothic-occupied France resulted with the sacking of Toulouse. Clovis and Alaric engage in one-on-one combat under the heroic code, a Bronze Age Israelite institution. Clovis killed Alaric and the Goths retreat, leaving Clovis of the Merovingian dynasty in control of all of France. The Franks and Visigoths cohabited the lands that would be called Spain and France. The Visigoths of Spain would remain for 204 years, 24-48 months, until the invasion of the Moors in 711 AD. Later European historians claimed that the comet meteor, seen by the Franks when they won the Battle of Poitiers, was like the pillar of fire that guided the Israelites in the wilderness. Further, if these annals be credible, when the Franks besieged Angoulême, at the sound of their trumpets, a spectacular miracle occurred when the walls of the city collapsed, which had occurred in 1407 BC, when the Israelites invaded Canaan at Jericho. 1. The End of Empire. 2. Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, Volume 4. 511 AD, 4405 AM. King Clovis I died, third king of the Merovingian dynasty. His sons were Theodoric, Chodomir, Childebert, and Lothar. The ancient Frankish people were originally known as Cimbres, or Cimbre and Cambri, a name linking them to the archaic German families descended from the Cimmerians, who were actually Sumerians, or Israelites of Samaria. These people were also called Gauls. Anciently, the lands known as France were settled by migrants that left the ruins of Troy in 1229 BC, a people who named the major cities Troie after Troy and Paris after the Trojan hero who carried off Helen of Troy. 1. Rule by secrecy. 2. The God Kings of Europe. 515 AD, 4409 AM. Approximate date for when Beowulf sailed and travelled to King Hrothgar's court in Denmark. The historicity of the Beowulf epic is the subject of Bill Cooper's excellent book, After the Flood. Beowulf was a Geat, a descendant of the Getae, a people of the earlier Massagetae and Gimeri, Samaria, of Israel. 516 AD, 4410 AM. King Vortigern of Britain was at constant war with the Picts and Scots to the north, and made a fatal mistake for his sovereignty. He invited King Hengist of continental Germania to send troops to aid him in defeating his domestic foes. In all, 300,000 Saxons answered the summons and sailed over to Britain, conquering them as well as the Angles that had settled the coasts. The Saxons were anciently known as the Sacs in the Near East, a people directly descended from the Israelites who had been deported by the Assyrians. The origin of the term Sacs was with their patriarch Isaac, Itzhak. Interestingly, even over a century after this Saxon invasion of Britain, the Anglo-Saxons and the Franks of Gaul could still understand each other's speech. The calendrics for this date established the Israelite pedigree of the Saxons. The Assyrians deported the 10 tribes of Israel in 745 BC, exactly 1260 years before 516 AD. Invasion of Saxons, and this invasion into Britain was exactly 1260 years before the founding of the greatest Israelite-descended Anglo-Saxon empire in the world, in 1776 AD, the United States of America. This 516 AD year was 666 times 5 years after the Great Pyramid was finished in 2815 BC, 1080 AM. Interestingly, this was 144 years after the Huns invaded in 372 AD. 1. Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, Volume 4. 517 AD, 4411 AM. This is the date in the Welsh annals of King Hywel, 10th century AD, for the Battle of Badon, led by Arthur of the Britons, who defended against the invading Saxons. The invasion of Britain continued in this year. This was 1447 years after Israel and Judah split in 931 BC, 1447 being the date of the exodus of Israel from Egypt. Also, this was 1229 years after the Judahites were spared Assyrian takeover of Jerusalem in 713 BC, 1229 BC being the date of the fall of Troy. London was originally named New Troy, Troia Nova. 1. Ancient Mysteries. 522 AD, 4416 AM. The Anunnaki planet Nibiru passes back through the inner solar system after 60 years above the ecliptic, descending back into the deep, completing its 792-year orbit. Also in this year, planet Phoenix passes through the inner solar system, completing its 138-year orbit. This is the only year in all of world history in the past and in the future that these two intruder planets pass through the inner system at the same time. Several devastating earthquakes struck Olympia in Greece. The calendrics for this year are prominent, and the effect these two intruder worlds had on Earth was probably not recorded effectively. Europe and the Near East were entering a dark age with literacy at an all-time low. There is evidence, though no dates are specified, that in the Americas at this time there was a great destruction visited upon these cultures. 1. The Naked Olympics. 525 AD, 4419 AM. An earthquake is felt throughout Europe, damaging several cities. This was the 1300th year of the Greek Olympiad calendar. 1. The Medieval World. 526 AD, 4420 AM. The Western Roman Emperor Theodosius died in Rome. Italy erupts in civil war and anarchy. This civil war will endure 28 years to 554 AD. The civil unrest and collapse of the political structure empowers the Church of Rome as people seek the guidance of the priests and popes because of the inability of the secular government to provide security. The King of Israel, great orbit train of comets and debris, enters the inner solar system. On May 29th, a massive earthquake rocked the Jewel of the East, the famed city of Antioch in Syria. As the ground trembled, flames fell from the sky, and a horrible stench bubbles up from the sea, hydrogen sulfide maybe. According to John of Ephesus, this archaic cosmopolitan city caught fire and thousands were burned alive while trapped in the rubble. In the several days after the disaster, bands of robbers plundered, raped and murdered many survivors. The total death toll is estimated at 250,000 in Antioch alone. In this same year, the scholar Dionysius Exiguus created a new calendar based off of the now widely accepted Christian story, the Anno Domini or Year of Our Lord calendar. He calculated year 1 AD to be the 754th year of Rome, thinking that was the birth of Jesus. He was a year or so off, but the mistake seems to have been deliberate or divinely inspired. This year begins the entire method of calculating dates BC or BCE and AD or CE. Prior to this year, the calendar had never been centralized, but different nations employed their own systems. This is the accepted calendar first of the entire Western world, and later the calendar adopted by the entire world. 1. March of the Titans. 2. Voyages of the Pyramid Builders. 527 AD, 4421 AM. Justinian begins to rule as emperor in Constantinople over the Eastern Empire. He would rule to 565 AD and be an infamous ruler who would marry a prostitute actress who was equally notorious. 529 AD, 4423 AM. Emperor Justinian of the Eastern Greek Empire had the Platonic Academy shut down after 900 years of service in education and dissemination of the arts and sciences. It was considered the oldest university in the world. 532 AD, 4426 AM. Emperor Justinian was hated by both political parties in Constantinople, called the Blues and the Greens. These factions' enemies united in an effort to overthrow Justinian. Justinian was considered thoroughly wicked. He had executed his political adversaries and sent out agents all over the empire to falsely accuse the rich and wealthy of imaginary crimes, so the treasury could confiscate their money and property. Innocents were imprisoned, banished, and killed to fill his own coffers. Justinian bled the people of Constantinople and surrounding domains with excessive taxes, enslaved and sold those who could not pay their debts, and elevated in power and authority those evil men who helped him falsely accuse others to acquire their wealth. He paid agents handsomely to cover his wife's tracks as she continually abducted people off the streets. Theodora was a beautiful dancer turned prostitute, and as the wife of Justinian, she had secret dungeons constructed where she confined her personal prisoners and did to them whatever she willed. These people were never seen alive again. Justinian suspended the best laws that protected the rights, privileges, and immunities of the people, and by decree forbade the Jews to observe Passover, abolishing formally all the laws of the Hebrews. Procopius, author of the Secret History, was alive and personally believed that Justinian was the Lord of Hell himself in the form of a man. Procopius wrote that Justinian did not eat, though he had the greatest foods available. He abolished the Roman consulship. The conspiracy by the leaders of the Blues and Greens led to the Nika Rebellion in this year, 5 days of chaos and anarchy in Constantinople, ancient Byzantium. The people rioted in the streets. The military was attacked by civilians, even women dropping rocks and pots from windows and roofs. The prisons were opened, the priesthood and temples raided, and the Heruli guards in the city, who worked for Justinian, burned some churches, and the fervour of the people heightened at this sacrilege. Much of this city burned, and many people escaped across the Bosphorus to Asia Minor in the 5 days. The St. Sophia Church and Outer Palace were burned, but not completely. About 30,000 people were killed in the chaos. Justinian's troops established control, put down the insurgents, and all the conspirators met with terrible deaths. Also in this year, according to John of Ephesus, quote, "The sun became dark, and its darkness lasted for 18 months. Each day it shone for about 4 hours, and still this light was only a feeble shadow," unquote. Everyone declared that the sun would never recover its full light again, unquote. A Roman writer named Cassiodorus, senator, wrote that, quote, "The sun seems to have lost its wonted light, and appears of a bluish colour. We marvel to see no shadows of our bodies at noon," unquote. Scientific analysis of ice core samples taken from Iceland determined that there was a major build-up of volcanic ash in the atmosphere in the years 533 to 534 AD, which, considering the actual date, was 532 AD according to those alive at the time. This is amazingly precise, for the dust veil would have lasted into 533 and 534. In this year, according to Gibbon in his Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, the gigantic and moody whale named Porphyria was found dead, washed ashore at the mouth of the river Sangaris. He was 10 cubits wide and 30 cubits in length. Porphyria was of the habit of attacking ships at the Bosphorus Strait. 1 Procopius, 28. 2 Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, Volume 4. 3 Atlantis and the Kingdom of the Neanderthals. 533 AD, 4427 AM. Emperor Justinian dispatches his greatest general Belisarius to Africa against the Vandals of Carthage. Belisarius defeated the Vandals, returning to Constantinople with vast wealth, among these being the seven-branched candlestick of the Jews, taken from Jerusalem in 70 AD, and then from Rome in 455 AD. Belisarius had invaded in 600 ships. Procopius in The Vandal War wrote that, quote, "A remarkable wonder was observed, for throughout the whole year the sun shone like the moon, with no radiance, as though in perpetual eclipse." Unquote. This supports the testimonies of John of Ephesus and Senator, mentioned in 532 AD. This same dimming of the sun was mentioned by the Chinese. By this time there was widespread starvation. Famine spread around the world as the dust veil caused crop failures throughout the entire year. 1. The Vikings. 534 AD, 44:28 AM. Starvation is global. Famine affects China in the east, over Asia and Europe, Africa to the Americas. 2 years of failed harvests depopulated the world and contributed greatly to the situations that caused the Dark Ages, the lack of civilization and its institutions like literacy and record preservation. 535 AD, 44:29 AM. Cosmas Indicopleustus wrote that the centre of civilization before the flood was located over the Western Sea from Europe. He wrote of these continents in the West, the Americas, before the post-Roman world was aware of them. 536 AD, 44:30 AM. General Belisarius of Constantinople is the Eastern Empire's greatest and most beloved general. In the 60th year since the fall of Rome to the Germans in 476 AD, according to Edward Gibbon, Pagi, Evagrius, and Nicephorus Callistus, Belisarius invaded Italy and defeated the Goths, taking Rome. The keys of the Eternal City are given to Emperor Justinian of the Eastern Empire. Belisarius was respected and loved by his soldiers, and for this reason Justinian and Theodora feared him. The general was known for his distribution of wealth to the poor after military campaigns, and for ordering his soldiers to aid in rebuilding cities and structures ruined during wartime operations. Belisarius was brave, cunning, expert in war, loyal to a fault, for his own emperor was unfaithful to him, allowing an intrigue by his wife and Theodora's friend, Belisarius' own wife, that got the general retired. Belisarius conquered the Goths, the Vandals, refused their most beautiful women, remained faithful to Antonina his wife, though she did not return this fidelity. He subdued Italy, Africa, many islands, capturing those that had been under Genseric and Theodorus. A genius who filled Constantinople with the wealth of nations, he himself fell by the conspiracy of his wicked wife. Famine in England and Ireland, lasting until 538 AD. A plague further decimates Africa, Egypt, India and Syria, as well as the Near East. We can assume that this epidemic was also in China and probably the Americas. 1. Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, Volume 4. 538 AD, 44:32 AM. Emperor Justinian of Constantinople of the Eastern Greek Empire declared the Pope in Rome to be the sovereign ruler of all Christendom, further declaring the Pope to be sovereign over Rome itself. This literally fulfilled the prophecy of Daniel concerning the emergence of the little horn that was diverse from the first 10 horns, kingdoms, that would rise up and begin to oppress them. This was the start of the papacy and the official beginning of the Roman Catholic papal office, made possible only because General Belisarius had driven the Ostrogoths away from Rome. This was predicted in the text of the Apocalypse, which read that this power would exercise dominion over the European 10 kings, nations, for 1260 years. This 1260 years also ended in accordance with prophecy, when in 1798 AD, Napoleon Bonaparte had the Pope put in chains and took his authority. The Revelation text reads that this ruler would be identified by the number 666 and the Pope in Latin was called Vicarius Filii Dei, which are also numerals adding up to 666. A further link between the Apocalypse descriptions of this oppressive civil religious power that would oppress the descendants of Israel, the 10 kingdoms of Europe, is the fact that the Roman papal system is seen as a rich whore sitting astride a 7-headed beast. It was a vulgar symbol anciently for females to sit astride an animal. The Vatican actually minted a 100 lira coin that clearly depicts the whore with the cup of blood. As Christianity has many precedents in Buddhism, we find it interesting that this was the year 1080 of the Buddhist calendar, as some related to ancient Israel and the earlier Sethites. This is the date in the Welsh annals of King Hywel of Wales, 10th century AD, for the Battle of Cumlan, where King Arthur, leader of the Britons, died. Further, a plague afflicted Britain and Ireland. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, in this year was a strange eclipse of the sun, and the stars appeared in daytime, because computer simulations revealed that no total solar eclipse occurred in this year. Historians have discredited these annals. However, as historical records around the world attest, the sun has darkened many times, and not by any motion of the moon. Close transiting objects cast their shadows on earth. 1. Revelation 13:18. 2. The Christ Conspiracy. 3. Ancient Mysteries. 4. Voyages of the Pyramid Builders. 539 AD, 4433 AM. The Persians capture the Syrian city of Antioch, now a predominantly Christian city. Antioch is called the Jewel of the East, one of the 4 major metropolitan cities of the old Roman Empire. 540 AD, 4434 AM. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle of Britain records that a total eclipse of the sun occurred again. Because computer projections demonstrate that the moon did not eclipse the sun at this time over Britain, these annals have met with scorn, but we know that a locally transiting object could have cast the earth in shadow, an object other than the moon. Also in this year began what has come to be called Justinian's Plague, probably bubonic. The Eastern Roman Empire, controlled by Constantinople, suffered a plague that came from the east and would last 52 years to 592 AD. 540 AD is half of 1080 AD. 1. Voyages of the Pyramid Builders. 542 AD, 4436 AM. The Justinian plague at its height. Procopius wrote that the plague had fallen upon the whole world. The Far East, India, was laid waste by the disease. Palestine, Syria, and Asia Minor depopulated, and Procopius wrote that the plague killed thousands inside the city of Constantinople. This plague is said to have wiped out half the population of Europe. This was the year 1948, since Israel became a nation in 1407 BC. 1948 Annus Mundi being 1947 BC, when Abraham was born, and 1948 AD is the year that Israel in the 20th century would become a nation again. This was also 1260 years since the 10 tribes were deported by the Assyrians in 721 BC. This was the 66th year since the fall of Rome, or 792 months. In this year, the British historian Gildas asserts Christianity was introduced into Britain in the last year of Tiberius Caesar, or in 38 AD. This is also the date that King Arthur and his knights in the Battle of Camblan died, fighting their enemy Mordred, who was also defeated. 1. Procopius, Secret History. 2. The Vikings, A Short History of the World. 3. St. Paul in Britain. 4. The Secret Teachings of All Ages. 547 AD, 4441 AM. The Gothic king Totila took the city of Rome back, most of Italy and Sicily. This was 11 years after Belisarius drove off the Goths and gave Emperor Justinian the keys to the city of Rome. 550 AD, 4444 AM. Procopius finished his The Secret History. about Emperor Justinian and his sinister wife, Theodora, a book written in private because of the contents, which would have guaranteed that he die a very unpleasant death. He and other writers of the time tell of the huge violent whale named Porphyrion that had ruined many ships during a 50-year period. 1 Procopius, The Secret History. 552 AD, 4446 AM. The White Huns invaded northern India in this year in the 476th year of the Indian Saka calendar. The Huns were an Israelite-descended people who had invaded Europe in 372 AD, exactly 180 years earlier. This was 1998 years, 666 times 3, after the Israelites fled Egypt in the Exodus in 1447 BC, and this Hun invasion was 1296 years, 432 times 3, after the 10 tribes were deported in 745 BC by the Assyrians. Further, this year was 864 years, 432 plus 432, of the Greek-Syrian Seleucid calendar that began in 313 BC. This was also 288, 144 plus 144, of the Coptic calendar that started in 264 AD. This was the year 552 AD, 552 being a phoenix cycle. Also in this year, the Goth king Attila, who took Rome in 547 AD, was killed by Nares. 1 Procopius, Secret History. 554 AD, 4448 AM. Emperor Justinian of Constantinople in the east invaded Italy and took Rome from the Goths, ending 28 years of anarchy and military takeovers. He founded the imperial restoration of the Roman Empire, the first of several historic attempts to rebuild the historic Roman Empire. This was precisely 500 years before the 1054 AD rift between the Eastern Orthodox and Western Roman churches. This was the 2000th year since the exodus of Israel from Egypt in 1447 BC. 1 March of the Titans. 559 AD, 4453 AD, AM. General Belisarius of Constantinople had been forced into retirement by conspiracy and the fear and mistrust of Emperor Justinian. But the Huns surrounded the walls of Constantinople, and Justinian was forced to recall Belisarius to defend the city. The Huns are repelled. 1 Procopius, The Secret History. 565 AD, 4459 AM. Historians attest that all three famous figures died in this year: Emperor Justinian, Belisarius, and the chronicler Procopius, author of The Secret History. Historians also estimate that as many as 100 million people lost their lives to the natural catastrophes during Justinian and Theodora's 40-year reign, as well as due to their violent policies, their criminal acts, wars, and famine. In this year was the first official sighting of the Loch Ness Monster by a man that would later become St. Columba, who was said to have subdued the creature, which impressed a local Pictish king. 1 Procopius, The Secret History. 2 Mystery at Acambaro. 566 AD, 4450 AM. Gregory of Tours recorded that brilliant lights appeared around the sun and the heavens appeared to be on fire. Some believe this date to have been 567 AD. Also, the Aztec-Spanish chronicler Itlilxochtli recorded that the Toltec city of Tollan in Mexico was in this year founded after the people underwent a period of migration. They came from the north. 1 Gods of Eden. 2 The Problem of Atlantis. 568 AD, 4452 AM. The Lombards flooded into northern Italy over the Alps and conquered the Ostrogoths. They founded their own kingdom. The Germanic Lombards, Longbeards, were of fearsome appearance, and they maintained the faith that Wotan, their Teutonic god, bestowed upon them divine favour for their long beards. The Teutons, though Germanic, were a branch of the Celts. Initially loathed, the Lombards quickly became civilized. Their kingdom involved the northern half of Italy. The Lombards at Milan established a pillar where their kings were coronated, a tradition shared by the other Germans. The coronation of a king who placed his hands on a pillar was an ancient Israelite institution with examples found in the Old Testament. Lombardy was founded 1320 years after 1407 BC, when the Israelites invaded Canaan and settled in the land. As 92 years after the fall of Rome in 476 AD by the Germans, this was 1104 months, 552 plus 552. 1. March of the Titans. 2. The night Attila died. 3. Freemasonry and its ancient mystic rites. 4. The evolution of the idea of God. 581 AD, 4475 AM. The Sui dynasty in China began, lasting 37 years to 618 AD. 596 AD, 4490 AM. The Roman Church of the Papacy introduced Catholicism into Britain in this year through its agent Augustine, but as a purer form of Christianity was already widespread throughout the land, the Romanized faith remained unpopular. The Catholic faith would never have a stronghold in England, for both popular and later monarchical reasons, as kings of England have rarely gotten along with the papacy. The government of the Saxons ruled the Britons and Angles, but the religion of the locals, Christianity, quickly overtook the Saxons. As the Saxon kingdoms of Essex, Wessex and Sussex were begun, the East Saxons, West Saxons and South Saxons, they absorbed Christianity like a sponge. 600 AD, 4494 AM. Isidore of Seville wrote in his Etymologies that the wooden remains of Noah's Ark were still to be seen upon Mount Ararat. This book was an encyclopedic reference work. Priorly, over 500 years before this, Josephus had said the same thing. In this year, Venantius Fortunatus claimed that Britain was evangelized by Paul. At this time on up to about 800 AD, it was a common belief among European nobility that the various migrating peoples wandering throughout Europe were the Israelites of the Old Testament. In fact, at this time the Lombards were viewed as the new Israel. 1. The incredible discovery of Noah's Ark. 2. St. Paul in Britain. 3. History in quotations. 606 AD, 4500 AM. Emperor Phocus, a murderous usurper, conferred upon Pope Boniface III the title Universal Bishop, decreeing that the papacy is the greatest and central authority of Christianity. The papacy enjoys civil endorsement for 1260 years to the year 1866 AD, when the European powers take the power of the papacy. 1. History of the First Council of Nice. Popery, foe of the Church. 610 AD, 4504 AM. A merchant of the Hashemite branch of the ruling Quraysh clan of Arabia, named Muhammad, began preaching a series of revelations, laying the foundation for Islam. 614 AD, 4508 AM. The Persians under the Shah Khosroes II invaded Palestine and took Jerusalem. Jerusalem was at that time under the Eastern Roman Empire of Constantinople. The city was not defended by Jews but by Christians who were treacherously dealt with by the local Jews who aided the invading Persians. After the Persian takeover, the Christian churches and shrines were burnt, and the Jews led in the slaughter of the Christian population. This Persian invasion against the West was 1104 years, 552 plus 552, after 491 BC, when the Persians under Darius also invaded the West. This was 138 years, Phoenix orbit, after the fall of Rome in 476 AD, or 1656 months. 1. History in quotations. 2. Iron Curtain over America. 618 AD, 4512 AM. The Tang dynasty emerged in China, which would last 288 years to 906 AD. Under this dynasty, China would enjoy an increase in arts, sciences and inventions. 622 AD, 4516 AM. Arab leaders in Mecca planned on assassinating the religious reformer Muhammad, but the plot is revealed and Muhammad escapes to Medina, which was then known as Yathrib, where the majority of his followers were gathered. The flight of Muhammad is called his Hijrah, which became the foundation year for the Islamic lunar calendar, the Hijra. This lunar calendar herein is only counted in solar years for the use of tabulation throughout Chronicon. This year signalled the emergence of an Arab Ishmaelite empire, the first Semitic empire to emerge in over 1,000 years. The last great Semitic culture fell in 146 BC in northern Africa, Carthage. As the start of a calendar, this year's calendrics are compelling. This was 2520 years after the tribes of the earth fragmented into migrating nations in 1899 BC. The Olympiad calendar began in 776 BC, and this was 1552 years after Israel and Judah split in 931 BC. 1552 years being 776 plus 776 years. Further, this year as 622 Anno Domini is half of 1244, and adding 1244 to 622 AD is 1866 AD, when the European powers subdue the Roman Catholic oppressive power. Further, this is the 666th year of the Roman Julian calendar. 622 first became significant before the flood, as the year that the prophet chronologist Enoch was born, in 3273 BC, 622 AM. 626 AD, 4520 AM. The Avars attack Constantinople, seat of the Eastern Roman Empire, but are unable to breach its walls, first built by Theodosius in 413 AD and rebuilt in 447 after an earthquake. This was 3552 months, 296 years, after Constantine made Byzantium, Constantinople, the seat of the Roman Empire. 3552 is 1776 plus 1776 months. This was exactly 1104 years after 479 BC, when the Greeks defeated the invading Persians, won the end of empire. 628 AD, 4522 AM. Muhammad, prophet of Allah and torch of Islam, wrote letters to all the known kings of the world. Messengers took his letters to all the courts and kings of the Middle East, northern Africa, the Near East to Persia and northern India, Asia Minor and Palestine. The letter called upon all kings of the earth to acknowledge Allah as the one true God and Muhammad his prophet. 1. A short history of the world. 630 AD, 4524 AM. The Greeks under Heraclius recovered Jerusalem from the Persians. This was exactly 300 years after Byzantium of the Greeks became the capital of the Roman Empire in 330 AD. The taking back of Jerusalem was 1244 years after 615 BC, when the Persians and Medes attacked Assyria with the Cimmerians, Israelites formerly of Samaria. This was 960 years after Alexander of Macedon became the king of Persia in 331 BC. 1. History in quotations. 632 AD, 4526 AM. Muhammad died, prophet of Islam. The epithet of prophet was not in the Israelite sense in that Muhammad predicted the future, for he did not. Unlike Old Testament prophets, Muhammad was a teacher and reformer, not a seer. The Arabs, under the banner of Islam, began attacking the Middle East and making incursions into Europe. 633 AD, 4527 AM. Throughout Europe, news had spread how the Jews dealt treacherously with the Christians who defended Jerusalem against the Persians. King Dagobert of the Merovingian dynasty gave the Jewish element in his kingdom the choice to either convert to Christianity or go into exile. This was the 600th year after the crucifixion event in 33 AD, one the god kings of Europe. 634 AD, 4528 AM. The Arabs defeat the Emperor Heraclius's army of Byzantium in the Battle of Yarmouk, which is quickly followed by Arabic invasions of Syria, Damascus, Palmyra, Antioch, and Jerusalem again. 1. The decline of the West, a short history of the world. 637 AD, 4531 AM. Islamic armies conquer Damascus and Ctesiphon and then turn east to Persia. General Rustam of Persia meets the Arabic army with war elephants, and for 3 days the armies clash at Kadessa until the Persians are routed. The Arabs eventually push all the way to eastern Turkestan until they even meet the Chinese. 1. The decline of the West. 2. A short history of the world. 638 AD, 4532 AM. In this year the Arabic army under Caliph Omar attacked Jerusalem, and the city surrendered. The Caliphate were those Islamic leaders seen as successors of Muhammad. This year was 1400 years after the destruction of Jerusalem in 763 BC by earthquake, and 1400 years before the year 2038 AD, when a Muslim invasion will attack Jerusalem. This was 700 years after 63 BC, when Rome annexed Jerusalem and Judea. Wars that changed the world. 641 AD, 4535 AM. An Islamic army under Caliph Omar invades Egypt. The Saracens are established in Alexandria in Egypt. By this time the famous Library of Alexandria had been sacked so many times by Christians and Romans that most of the valuable books were already scattered throughout the Mediterranean and Europe. History books are full of how Omar ordered the destruction of the Alexandrian library, and for this reason many priceless books were forever lost. But the truth is that the books were already censored and burned by the decree of bishops, Roman emperors and popes. Further, the story of Omar burning the treasured books was non-existent for 500 years, and did not surface until mentioned in the 13th century by a Christian bishop named Abul Faragius of Guba. The Muslims did indeed burn many Christian texts, many times at the promptings of Jewish antagonists, but the destruction of Christian texts was actually caused by the Roman Catholic agents in their centuries-long campaign to censor any writings in opposition of their own. This invasion of Egypt was exactly 1320 years, or 7920 plus 7920 months, after 680 BC, when King Esarhaddon of Assyria invaded Egypt and took Thebes. In this year too a Muslim army invades northern India. The decline of the West, our sun god. 644 AD, 4538 AM. The famous Dome of the Rock is built on Temple Mount in Jerusalem, a huge Muslim mosque. This was exactly 1600 years after the Israelites under King Jedediah, Solomon, assembled at the dedication ceremony for the Temple in Jerusalem in 957 BC. The Arabs were popularly regarded as children of Abraham, as were the Israelites, and this year was precisely 2520 years after the institution of the Abrahamic covenant in 1877 BC. 645 AD, 4539 AM. The Greek Christians of Byzantium assembled a massive fleet and invaded Egypt, taking back the city of Alexandria from the Saracens. Interestingly, the Egyptian Sothic cycle was 1461 years, and this was 1461 years to the end of the prophetic timeline of 6,000 years that ends in 2106 AD. 647 AD, 4541 AM. The Arabic Muslim army conquers the city of Carthage. This amazingly was the 792nd year after 146 BC when the Romans conquered Carthage. The decline of the West. 652 AD, 4546 AM. The canonical text of the Quran, the holy scriptures of Islam, is fixed by the Caliph Uthman, who destroyed all the other versions and documents attributed to Muhammad. The Quran known today is the product of extreme censorship. The discoverers, Borstin. 660 AD, 4554 AM. Planet Phoenix passes through the inner solar system, completing its 138-year orbit. This is the height of the Dark Ages, and literacy is at an all-time low. Records are not kept, and those that were made at this period largely did not survive. This year is 184 years after the fall of Rome, or 2208 months, 552 times 4. 672 AD, 4566 AM. The Muslims, having lost Alexandria to the Christians of Constantinople, Byzantium, launched a navy from Egypt against Constantinople. They would continue to send navies to harass and attack Constantinople until 718 AD. This is exactly 1332 years, 666 plus 666, after 661 BC, the very year Byzantium was founded. 676 AD, 4570 AM. The Islamic army conquers the city of Samarkand. Samarkand was New Samaria, a city built and occupied by deported Israelites sometime between 740 to 610 BC. This was exactly 1400 years after the siege of Samaria began in 723 BC, and 1260 years after the fall of Judah in 585 BC to Babylon. It was from Samarkand that the waves of Cimmerian migrations departed, that filled Europe with vast populations of wandering peoples. 1. The decline of the West. 679 AD, 4573 AM. King Dagobert II of the Merovingian line over the Franks returned from exile in Ireland, where he had been taken priorly, due to a church conspiracy to have him killed. In this year he reclaimed the throne over the Franks, but Mayor Pepin the Fat, at the Roman Church's prompting, had him killed by being lanced through the eye. Backed by the papacy, Pepin passed the rule of the Frankish Empire over to his son Charles Martel, thus beginning the Carolingian dynasty over Old France. The Merovingian line began with Meroveus, then his son Childeric, and Meroveus' grandson Clovis I. The dynasty lasted over the Franks about 200 years. 1. The Merovingian mythos. 684 AD, 4578 AM. A comet appeared this year according to the Nuremberg Chronicles that was published in the year 1493 AD. 1. Introduction to comets. 692 AD, 4586 AM. The unusual Mayan king Pakal Votan died in this year, and the Maya built the Temple of the Inscriptions over his sarcophagus. Pakal Votan was commemorated as the greatest king of the Maya. His tomb would remain hidden under the pyramid for exactly 1260 years, when discovered by accident in 952 AD, beneath 13 corbelled vaults that embody the concept of the 13 heavens of the Mayan cosmology. The multi-ton sarcophagus lid has an elaborate engraving of Pakal Votan that has given rise to the ancient astronaut theory so popular in the 20th century. Pakal Votan was a mystery. In his tomb was found a statue of a Caucasian in long robes with a beard, goatee, facial hair being non-existent among the Maya. Further, Pakal Votan was said to have been a foreigner who had arrived among the Maya by ship. The sarcophagus was huge, once holding the remains of a man who had stood at least 8.5 to 9 feet tall. The lid of the sarcophagus itself was 5 tons. It was also in this year that the Church in the Fifth Council of Constantinople replaced the ancient image of the fish to the picture of a man crucified on the cross. This year was the 5000th of the Phoenix chronology, and 1200 years after the founding of the Republic of Rome in 509 BC. 1. Mysteries and magic. Fingerprints of the gods. 2. Return of the serpents of wisdom. 3. Lost cities of North and Central America. 4. The Gospel Truth. 700 AD, 4594 AM. The Council of Constantinople solemnly condemned the use of images, idols and representations, ordering their removal from the churches. 1. Popery, foe of the Church. 710 AD, 4604 AM. Crossing the Mediterranean by fleet, the Muslim-Arabic invasion of Spain begins. The European Jews of Spain and France know in advance of the invasion by virtue of their communication network with the Jewish communities in the Near East, Northern Africa and Persia, as well as Damascus. By this time, Arabic armies have invaded deep into Africa and butchered whole villages, forcing the black Africans to convert to Islam. The black males were trained in Islamic doctrine and Arabic military tactics, and the Muslims raised an entire army of black militants, known as the Moors, who participated heavily in the invasion of Europe. This was exactly 1200 years after 491 BC, when the Persians invaded the West, and 1188 years, 108 times 11, after 479 BC, when the West, Greeks, defeated the invading Persians. 1. The decline of the West. 712 AD, 4606 AM. For almost 2 years the Moors made inroads into Spain and slaughtered all those Christian communities that resisted their rule. The Europeans are beaten back in the Battle of Xeres. The Moors overrun the strongholds and cities. All throughout Spain the Moors subdued the Christians and made the local Jews their masters, placing into positions of authority the Jews that had aided their causes. This occurred in Cordova, Granada, Malaga, and other cities. At Toledo, as the Christian population was praying for peace and protection against the Moors in their churches, the local Jews flung open the city gates and allowed the Muslims into the city unopposed. This occurred on Palm Sunday. The Jewish animosity against the Christians and white Europeans is ancestral, dating to even before the civil war of 931 BC, when Israel and Judah split. However, the Jews at Toledo were particularly loath of the Christian population because of the policies of King Recared, who refused to allow the wealthy Jews to own Christian slaves. The Jews sought to have slave holdings as they had in other countries. King Recared had already been stressed over the sizable Jewish population in his Visigothic realm, a people who refused to assimilate with the Visigoths, who maintained their nation within a nation status. He was further dismayed that the Jews would not Christianize. This was the 1296th year since the fall of Judah to Babylon in 585 BC, or 432 times 3 years. This was also the 90th year, 1080 months, of the Islamic after Hijrah calendar begun in 622 AD. 1. Iron Curtain over America. 713 AD, 4607 AM. Pope Constantine formally cursed by decree all those who would deny veneration to images and idols that the Roman Church has approved. This was in contravention to the edicts of councils. The debate within the Church over idolatry continued. 1. Popery, foe of the Church. 716 AD, 4610 AM. About 800 Arab warships attacked Constantinople, but only a very few made it back to their ports. The Greeks had a secret weapon for their navy known only as Greek fire, an incendiary that burned ships quickly and once started was almost impossible to put out. This year was 2592 years after institution of the Abrahamic Covenant in 1877 BC. It was also the 1460th year of the post-exilic chronology, began 745 BC, and the 1224th year since the founding of the Republic of Rome in 509 BC, which Constantinople inherited. Finally, this was 240 years after the fall of Rome. 1. Technology of the Gods. 720 AD, 4614 AM. The Moors were controlled by the Saracens of Egypt, and the Saracens took their orders from the Muslim Arabs, who had as their base of operations in the wars of Islam the ancient city of Damascus, the seat of Umayyad authority. Damascus sent instructions to the Arabs, now in southern France, to conquer the realm of the Franks. Reinforcements from the Visigothic realm of Spain were sent into southern France along the war front, while the Jews secured their control over the Christian Europeans that the Moors had subdued. Spain experienced a population explosion of Jewish communities as Jews sailed in from ports all around the Mediterranean, as news spread about the utopia they had in Spain. Christians were again sold as slaves to the local Jews, and a market was established where Jewish merchants trafficked in white slaves exported from Spain. The Arabic scholar al-Makari wrote, quote, "Whenever the Muslims conquered a town, it was left in the custody of the Jews," unquote. This led to growing Jewish population centres at Cordova, Tarragona and Granada. This was the year 1600 after the founding of the Israelite capital city of Samaria in 881 BC. Further, this was exactly 1440 years after 721 BC, when the last of the 10 tribes of Israel were deported as slaves into Assyria, as the kingdom of Judah remained intact. 1. Decline of the West. 2. The God Kings of Europe. 731 AD, 4625 AM. The Anglo-Saxon scholar known as the Venerable Bede published his History of the English Church and People, a serious work of history that does not at all mention King Arthur. Bede also declared that the Julian calendar was slightly off, being in error 11 minutes and 14 seconds too long, causing an error of a day every 128 years. At this time he was ignored, and modification to the calendar would not be performed until 1582, when the Gregorian calendar succeeded the Julian. 1. Saxons, Vikings and Celts. 732 AD, 4626 AM. The Islamic army made a critical mistake in their European campaign. They had completely overrun the Visigothic realm, created a Jewish utopia, and occupied southern France. Here they should have stopped. Instead, they invaded the empire of the Franks, which was ruled by Charles the Hammer Martel, a successor to the Merovingian kings. This was 236 years after the Frankish people converted to Christianity, after the lead of their king Clovis I. Charles Martel was the grandfather of the famous Charlemagne. Charles ruled almost all of Europe north of the Alps, from the Pyrenees to Hungary. The Arab army won several battles, took many towns and fortresses, and even marched almost all the way to Paris. But Charles the Hammer stopped their onslaught. He defeated the Saracens at Tours-Poitiers, and thus ended Muslim expansion in Europe. The Frankish victory over Islam is exactly 1044 years after the start of the Greek Seleucid calendar in 313 BC, just as it is 1044 years before the founding of the Israelite-descended Anglo-Saxon French Empire of the United States of America in 1776 AD. The Japanese record strange phenomena in the heavens, earthquakes and an epidemic. This was the year 5040 of the Phoenix chronology, or 360 times 14 years. 1. The decline of the West. 2. History in quotations. 734 AD, 4628 AM. After the defeat of the Saracens and Moors in France, a widespread white European animosity toward the Jews arose for their participation in allowing the Muslim atrocities in Spain and southern France. As this was the Dark Ages, we have few records, but the picture emerging is one of terror on the part of the Jews, who saw their own lives in peril should the Muslims pull all the way out of Europe. White enslavement, confiscation of properties, and even the abduction of beautiful Visigothic females would guarantee that the Jews would be dealt with harshly. The communication network of the Jews was international, and centuries before any other nation or nationality. Ships full of Jewish people and their belongings took off from European ports and gathered to vanish over the western Atlantic to, quote, an unknown and uninhabited land, unquote. Some called the destination Kalalus, and the general consensus among researchers is that the Jewish fleet sailed to Central America. A fleet of Jews also fled Rome. What is interesting is that the very next year is 735 AD, being 1447 years after 713 BC, when the Judahites, ancestors of the Jews, were delivered from the Assyrians under Sennacherib. The year 1447 BC was the year of the Israelite Exodus, calendarically inferring here that the fleets of Jews in their own exodus made it to their American destination in 735 AD. Further, 735 AD is 600 years after the Jewish population of Judea and Jerusalem is exterminated by the Romans, ending the Bar Kokhba rebellion in 135 AD. Because the historical presence of this Jewish population in the early Americas has not been verified, we can assume they perished likewise. This voyage in 734 AD was 1736 years after the founding of the throne of David in 1003 BC, 434 years being a judged time period. Also, this date was 2520 years, 360 times 7, after Jacob, Israel, and Esau were born in 1787 BC. The Japanese report again that in this year strange phenomena with earthquakes were seen in the skies. 1. Ancient man. 2. Pirates and the Lost Templar Fleet. 3. History in quotations. 735 AD, 4629 AM. Albinus Alcuin is born. He died in 804 AD. A widely known Anglo-Saxon scholar who would be highly regarded for his erudition. He would study an ancient Hebrew copy of the Book of Jasher and translate it into Latin. The copy he translated, which survives today, is not to be confused with those forgeries of the Book of Jasher that later caused the academic world to lose interest in the original text. The Book of Jasher provides the full account of the Exodus and wandering of Israel out of Egypt in 1447 BC, and this is 1447 years after the Assyrians were destroyed outside Jerusalem in 713 BC. 740 AD, 4634 AM. The Japanese continued to document strange phenomena in the skies and earthquake activity in this year and in 741 AD. 1. History in quotations. 743 AD, 4637 AM. In the Irish Book of the Four Masters, we find recorded that strange stars appeared in the sky. This coincides with the Japanese accounts. In this year appeared the 2046 AD Nibiru comet orbit train that broke free of Nibiru's gravitational strewn field in 522 AD. 1. Round Towers of Atlantis. 744 AD, 4638 AM. The Irish Book of the Four Masters records that in this year there were seen numerous stars that fell from the sky. This year is precisely 1296 years before the next global cataclysm involving stars falling to the Earth causing great destruction in 2040 AD, when planet Phoenix transits between the Sun and Earth. This Anno Domini year of 744 is 1488 years after the Israelites were deported by the Assyrians in 745 BC. 1. Round Towers of Atlantis. 749 AD, 4643 AM. The Japanese complete the largest bronze statue in the world, a 72-foot-high, 550-ton Buddha covered with 50 pounds of gold. It still remains the largest bronze statue on Earth. The Umayyad authority over the Islamic Arabic world yields, as Safar becomes the first caliph of the Abbasid dynasty, a dynasty that would endure exactly 476 years to 1225 AD. 1. The Discoverers, Borston. 2. Time, Almanac, 2008. Time, Encyclopaedia Britannica. 751 AD, 4645 AM. The Roman Church enforced the donation of Constantine, a totally fictitious document made official merely because the Roman Church sought the power. The document was purported by the Church to be written by the hand of Constantine the Great before his death in 337 AD. The bogus document claimed that Constantine gave the entire power and wealth of the Roman Empire to the Church, including the right to crown and dethrone kings. Though the majority of the royalty throughout Europe had believed it to have been a forgery perpetuated by the Roman Church, the papacy had by this time become so powerful that this move and assumption of power went unopposed. Amazingly, this document surfaced exactly 414 years, a cursed earth period, after Constantine died, and the document was supposed to have been written in 337 AD. One of the first moves of the Church was to depose the Merovingians over the Franks, which Charles the Hammer represented. With this move, the divine right of kings became the divine right of the Church, and all royalty who opposed the Church from this point onward were ruthlessly removed. Lorenzo Valla studied the donation of Constantine and revealed that it was a fraud from its inception, for it was written using biblical passages quoted from the Latin Vulgate Bible compiled by Jerome, who was born 2 decades after Constantine died. Therefore, the document had to have been composed at the very earliest 50 years after the death of Constantine. Valla would publish his findings on the fraud in the year 1440 AD, 1. The Dragon Legacy. 754 AD, 4658 AM. In the Seventh Greek Council at Constantinople, the practice of idolatry in the Church was again condemned. Constantine V burned idols and demolished the walls of churches that had on them images and idols of Christ and the Virgin Mary. 1. Popery fell of the Church. 756 AD, 4650 AM. The main Mayan pyramid at Copan in Central America is completed in this year. This is 5994 years after the start of the Anunnaki chronology, or 666 times 9 years. This was 144 months before the assembly of Mayan astronomers met in Copan in 762 AD. 1. The Lost Realms, Sitchin, Skywatchers in the Jungles. 762 AD, 4656 AM. In 762 AD, the Abbasid dynasty over Islam that replaced the Umayyads relocated to Baghdad in Babylon. Islamic architects began laying out the city of Baghdad according to a plan. A fabulous new city emerged as a new Babylon. built by the wealth of kingdoms taken by the Arab armies that scoured Africa, the Mediterranean, the Near East, Spain and Asia. The Muslim empire would spread out with Baghdad as its capital, the seat of the caliphate. In this year the Jewish exilarch Solomon died, the leader over the exiled Jews living in Persia. His hereditary successor was Anan ben David, but the elders rejected him, opting to install his younger brother Kanania as exilarch. Anan fled to Palestine and founded his own synagogue, calling upon the Jews everywhere to abandon the corrupt Talmud and obey only the inspired word of God found in the Pentateuch, Genesis through Deuteronomy. His sect became influential and known as the Karaites, or adherents to the text. Anan's views on Jesus were positive, and he urged Jews to resist the corrupt rabbinate, for he thoroughly believed that the Jewish rabbis were modern Pharisees bent on propagating the traditions of men rather than the words of God. Also in this year of 762 AD, Mayan astronomers from several cities in Central America assembled at the city of Copan. Detailed pictorial reliefs in stone depict the event, and a Mayan date is offered on altar Q that corresponds to AD 762-763. 16 sky watchers attended this important meeting. Whatever was decided is unknown, but it was important enough that in the following year of 763, steles were erected commemorating the event in all the major cities of the Maya. The Mayan sky watchers were the civilization's chronologists, and this year was one of astounding calendrical alignments. This year was the 6,000th of the Anunnaki chronology, or 600 times 10 years. It was the 4800 year of the orbital chronology, and 4200 years since the Watchers descended to Earth before the flood. This was 3600 years after the Nephilim Anunnaki dynasty began before the flood in 2839 BC. And this year was also the 3000th year since the Great Flood. This 3000 years was 600 times 5 years. This rift in the Jewish faith was 2208 years after the Exodus in 1447 BC, and Israelites receiving the law. What the Maya observed or concluded is not known, but the significance of this year is also connected to the ancient Four Sons traditions of all the Native American cultures. 762 AD is 1344 years to the end of the timeline given to archaic humanity, ending 2106 AD, the 6,000th year from mankind's banishment in 3895 BC. But 762 AD was also 1344 years after the last time Phoenix appeared in the Four Sun Age traditions, in 583 BC, when it darkened the sun as recorded by Herodotus. In this year, Judaism experienced a rift. Babylon had a new beginning. Islam established a capital city, and the Maya on the other side of the world established the astronomical, thus the chronological significance of 762 AD. 1. The decline of the West. 2. A new look at God's calendar. 3. The lost realms, sky watchers in the jungles, Sitchin. 768 AD, 4662 AM. Charles the Great becomes king over the Franks, the grandson of Charles Martel. This is Charlemagne, who claims descent from Merovingian kings. He rules much of Europe over France, Germany, regions of Spain, Italy and Austria. This most famous of early European kings began his reign on a very calendrically important year. Not only was it the 1080th year of the Greek-Syrian Seleucid calendar, but also 1488 years after the last of the 10 tribes of Israel were deported by the Assyrians in 721 BC, whose descendants were now directly under the rule of Charlemagne. 772 AD, 4666 AM. Emperor Charlemagne imposes Christianity upon all Saxony or northwestern Europe, the regions now called Germany. This was not a peaceful endeavour. The Franks invaded German territories and forced villages and kingdoms to convert to Christianity. No alternatives were provided, and Germans and Vikings in the far north developed a hatred for the Franks and the God of the Christians, regarding him as an enemy war deity. This religious invasion campaign of Charlemagne literally initiated what was to follow, the Viking invasions. This year was 276 years after Clovis I of the Merovingian dynasty of the Franks converted to Christianity with the Franks in 496 AD. 774 AD, 4668 AM, Charlemagne leads the Franks against northern Italy and conquers Lombardy, the kingdom of the Lombards, Longbeards, who had defeated the Goths and settled there 206 years earlier in 568 AD. The Franks, French, continue their excursions into the northern regions of Europe in their campaign to force the population to convert to Christianity. This year was 666 plus 666 years, 1332, before Armageddon in 2106 AD. This was the 4,444th year of the ancient Jewish calendar, and also the 444th year since Constantinople became the seat of the Roman Empire in 330 AD. The sum of 444 times 4 is 1776, and counting 1776 years before this year, we arrive at the establishment of the throne of David in 1003 BC. 444 times 5 is 2220, which, this being 774 AD, was the 2220th year since the Great Deluge in 2239 BC. 775 AD, 4669 AM. In the Royal Frankish Annals we find the Christian Franks attacking the Saxons in a series of severe battles, trying to force them to accept Christianity. Won the Vikings. 782 AD, 4676 AM. The Saxons rebelled against the Frankish power, defeating them in battle. Charlemagne retaliated by forcibly deporting many Saxons, and he had others, thousands of them, baptized and then promptly executed. The Saxons continued to resist the enforcement of Christianity until 804 AD. Won the Vikings. 786 AD, 4680 AM. The Muslim Caliph of Baghdad, named Harun al-Rashid, came to power until 809. The same ruler written about in the now world-famous The Arabian Nights. This Caliph corresponded with Charlemagne, even sending gifts. This act was not done in submission, but as a demonstration of his own prestige and wealth. Won a short history of the world. 787 AD, 4681 AM. The Second Council of Nicaea established once and for all that idolatry was accepted in the Roman Catholic Church. To complete this wicked act, the Church of Rome presumed to expunge the second of the 10 Commandments, and then rewrote the 10th Commandment, splitting it into 2 commandments to complete the 10. 1. Planet in rebellion. 789 AM, 4683 AM. Charlemagne ordered all pagan manuscripts throughout his European empire to be destroyed. This is exactly 396 years, half of 792, after the purging of books at Alexandria in 393 AD. In this year 3 strange ships appeared off of England's coast, and when a king's sheriff tried to compel them to come to shore, they killed him. This was England's first contact with the Danes, the most powerful of those called the Vikings. 1. Elder gods in antiquity. 2. Saxons, Vikings and Celts. 793 AD, 4687 AM. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records that huge streaks of bright flames raced across the sky, along with terrible comets, flying dragons, that brought a famine. These were seen over Northumbria. Off the Northumbrian coast occurred the first Viking attack. They looted a monastery at Lindisfarne on June the 8th. They went on to attack churches, killing people near them. This year is the first appearance of the Reuben Comet Group, which broke free of Nibiru in 522 AD. Albinus Alcuin, the Anglo-Saxon scholar, wrote about the Viking raids. The name Viking derived from an Old Norse verb meaning to move speedily, vikja. The Vikings of Scandinavia were in fact the people formerly of Pontus, a people that immigrated many centuries priorly, long after their great king Mithridates made war against Rome and died. The Viking age that began at this time was due to a population explosion in northern Europe, coupled with a lack of resources and widespread poverty. According to tradition, lots were cast for ownership of lands, and the losers were left with gathering men of similar fate to build ships and set out in search of new lands to settle their families. Some Viking men joined only to acquire adventure, wealth and foreign women. 1 in 3 families lost out on the lots and had to move on. The Vikings have been painted by the brush of prejudice as barbarians, a race given to piracy and bloodlust. When the Vikings first set out on the shores of England and Scotland, they burned the churches, the bell towers and Christian shrines, because to the Viking mindset they were involved in a holy war against the Christian religion. Many historians have noted that the Vikings left many structures untouched, concentrating their violence against monks, priests, bishops, church structures and shrines. The Vikings knew about the Christian God. They knew that the German Saxons suffered much under the Franks, who forced the Saxon population to convert to this strange and bloody god. To the Vikings there was nothing wrong with waging war against this heartless religion. The Saxons controlled England, their main kingdoms being Essex, Wessex and Sussex, and these Saxons were intruders upon Britain lands as well. According to the Frankish Annals of Fulda, the Danes were the most powerful of the three Viking peoples, referred to as the Northmen, Norse. It is interesting that the animosity between the French and the Germans that endures even to this day had its origins with forced conversions to Christianity and the massacres by Franks conducted on the German Saxons. The Muslim Caliph Harun al-Rashid of Baghdad still ruled when paper was first used as a medium for the written word. 1. Book of Fabulous Beasts, Flying Serpents and Dragons. 2. Saxons, Vikings and Celts. 3. The Discoverers, Borston. 4. The Vikings. 794 AD, 4688 AM. Viking fleets attack the English town of Jarrow. 795 AD, 4689 AM. Vikings attack the west coast of Scotland and St Columba's Church on island of Iona. 1. Saxons, Vikings and Celts. 798 AD, 4692 AM. Planet Phoenix passed through the inner solar system, completing its 138-year orbit. This was still the Dark Ages, and no records for this year have been found. It may have been too far away to have been seen, meaning Earth was too far along the ecliptic path around the Sun, perhaps on the opposite hemisphere of the Sun when Phoenix passed through. 800 AD, 4694 AM. Pope Leo III of Rome crowned Charlemagne as the first Holy Roman Emperor on Christmas Day. He was the grandson of Charles Martel. At this time the royal house of Narbonne in the south of France, closely allied to Charlemagne, was regarded as descended from the house of David. This seems to be reflected in the Encyclopaedia Judaica, which states that Narbonne was home to the Jewish kings. This line would produce Godfrey of Bouillon, king of Jerusalem after the First Crusade. Also at this time the Jewish writer Eldad Hadani collected traditions about the migrations of the 10 tribes of Israel and wrote them on what is known as the Cochin Scroll. Even before his time, Israelite tribes had populated Eastern Europe, Bactria, around the Caspian Sea and Asia as various Scythian peoples. By now Albinus Alcuin, the Anglo-Saxon scholar, reformed church liturgy and finished his Latin from Hebrew translation of the Book of Jasher. This was the year 1460 since the founding of the Greek city of Byzantium, later to be called Constantinople, where the seat of the Eastern Roman Empire lay. 1. The Merovingian mythos. 2. The Jesus Papers. 803 AD, 4697 AM. Ancient Dutch stories and traditions of a global flood and cataclysm are compiled into the Ura Linda manuscript by Adela, the wife of a chieftain. She stood 7 feet tall. The Dutch stories relate that the Great Flood was actually the final part of a massive cataclysm of stars falling from the sky. 1. Secret cities of Old South America. 804 AD, 4698 AM. A Saxon insurrection protesting Charlemagne's forced Christianity was put down by the Franks. It was the oppression and ceaseless wars of the Franks against their Saxon cousins that planted a deep hatred of Christianity in the hearts and minds of the Vikings. Rumours and reports filtered through northern Europe at the atrocities committed by the Franks against the Saxons in their program to force the Saxons to accept the religion of Charlemagne. 1. The Vikings. 806 AD, 4700 AM. The Chinese incorporate a paper money system. 813 AD, 4707 AM. Al-Mamun begins ruling as Caliph of Baghdad of the Abbasid dynasty. He is a scholar and researcher of scientific, philosophical and religious works of the Indians, Greeks, Romans, Christians and Arabic sages. He developed an acute fascination of the Great Pyramid at Giza, no doubt aware of the many Coptic records about the architectural complex. Also at this same time, the Greek monks Methodius and Cyril evangelized Bulgaria and converted it to Christianity. The king Boris was baptized. The rapid conversion was because these monks translated the Greek New Testament into the Bulgar language. 1. The Albigensian heresy. 814 AD, 4708 AM. On his way back from his 47th campaign and returning from Saxony, Charlemagne and his men saw a comet flash across the sky, perhaps a large meteorite. At the same time, at the palace of Aachen, there were felt earth tremors. Charlemagne was 70 years old and died soon after this. 1. The Spear of Destiny. 815 AD, 4709 AM. The Bishop of Lyon, in an old French manuscript, describes strange pictures appearing in the crop fields that he describes as works of the devil. Aside from the archaic traditions concerning circles created in wheat fields by the fairy folk, and strange lights like will-o'-the-wisps, this is the first written account about the crop circle phenomenon. 1. Crop circles, gods and their secrets. 820 AD, 4714 AM. The Muslim Caliph of Baghdad, al-Mamun, travelled from Babylonia, Iraq, to Lower Egypt and camped at the foot of the partially buried Great Pyramid of Giza. He employed labourers and promised that inside the pyramid was treasure. There was no apparent entrance to the Great Pyramid, but al-Mamun knew that the ancient Egyptians and later Romans had access to a secret portal, a heavy stone door cleverly pivoted. This he could not find. His men spent 6 weeks tunnelling through the almost marble-hard limestone. On the verge of giving up their excavation of what was the same as solid rock, a clear thump was heard in the tunnel, and the men renewed their efforts, tunnelling in the direction in which most agreed they believed the sound to have come from. They discovered the descendant passage, which ran about 3-5 feet from the outside of the pyramid, which had been blocked, and a continuing tunnel under the pyramid plateaus. This tunnel was known to the Egyptians, Romans, and many others. In fact, this is the only architectural feature replicated in all the other pyramids found around the world from Egypt, Libya, and Central and South America. They were all designed with descendant passages and underground grottos. But the accidental discovery of al-Mamun was incredible, for the thump they heard was a formerly unknown and cleverly concealed prism ceiling block that hid the entrance to the ascendant passage, a tunnel system unknown to all pyramid-building civilizations. This architectural feature of ascendant corridors and chambers in the Great Pyramid of Giza was not copied by any other builders. This means that by the time the ancients explored the inside of the monument and built their own versions of the pyramid, the granite plug prism was in place and the upper tunnels were unknown. The granite plug was one of a series of blockage plugs, and they could have only been dropped into place from above, meaning that much of the Great Pyramid had to have been finished before the plugs could have been slid into place. In Chronicon, Lost Science of Prophetic Engineering, it is shown that there is a calendrical timeline encoded in the internal measurements of the Great Pyramid, and that the tunnel entrance al-Mamun discovered in this timeline is exactly at that juncture in the pyramid chronology, identifying the AD year of 820. This is beyond coincidence. The pyramid timeline encoding the exact year that its internal ascendant passage tunnel would be discovered. Al-Mamun found no treasure but had money buried where his men could discover it, in compensation for all they did. He may have been the first person to step inside the king's chamber and see the empty sarcophagus since the time of Abraham. He had an appreciation for the sanctity of the site and must have had his men fill the tunnel back in, but they left the entrance to the ascendant passage open, because for centuries afterward no chronicler who had visited the Great Pyramid could find a way inside. Joseph Jockman wrote that when the pyramid was first entered, there were salt incrustations an inch thick. Chemical analysis in modern times showed that some of this salt had a mineral content consistent with salt from the sea. He also wrote that the medieval historian Biruni, writing in his treatise, The Chronology of Ancient Nations, noted, quote, "The traces of the water of the deluge and effects of the waves are still visible on these pyramids halfway up, above which the water did not rise, unquote. In 1899 BC, the delta region of Lower Egypt emerged out of the Mediterranean, and the region was called by the Egyptians the Raised Land. The Giza complex had been under the sea for 340 years exactly, since the deluge. Also in 820 AD, the first recorded Viking raid occurred against the Frankish realm. The Vikings sailed up the Seine River, 13 ships according to the Royal Frankish Annals. 1. The Great Pyramid, Smythe. 2. The Christ Conspiracy. 4. The Vikings. 828 AD, 4722 AM. A former refugee at the court of Charlemagne, Egbert, who is English, becomes the King of England. He is recorded in history as England's first king, his seat at Wessex. This year is 414 plus 414 Anno Domini. The Vikings continue their raids around England, Scotland and off the coast of Ardtianachta. According to the Irish Annals of Ulster, the Vikings slaughtered an unusual amount of porpoises. Genetic research conducted in 2000 AD found it impossible to determine the difference between 5th century Saxons in England and 9th century Vikings. This reveals that King Egbert and the people of Essex, Wessex and Sussex, and a great many others throughout England, were kin to the Vikings that were now feared. As we have seen, both were of ancient Israelite stock. The start of England is 1242 years, 414 times 3, before the 2070 AD resurrection event. 1. The Vikings. 829 AD, 4723 AM. Caliph al-Ma'mun has an astronomical observatory constructed in Baghdad. He was a scholar and appreciated learning and had Islam's first chart of astronomy drafted. 835 AD, 4729 AM. Danish Vikings begin in this year conducting annual raids and will continue for 30 years against England until 865 AD. 837 AD, 4731 AM. A comet is recorded by the Chinese. Planet Venus finished a complete 5-point cycle that required it 1199 years to form a completed pentagram in the sky. In this year, Venus was closest to the star Alcyone, the centre, in the Pleiades, and this pentagram cycle will be complete in 2036 AD. Interestingly, the apocalypse begins in the year 2036. 1. Introduction to comets. 2. Beyond 2012. 838 AD, 4732 AM. The Vikings attacked Wessex in England, and King Egbert defeated them at Hingston Down in a naval battle that occurred after the Vikings sailed up the Tamar River. Note that in early England there was a Tamar River, the name of an ancient Judahite princess allegedly brought to the British Isles in 583 BC by the prophet Jeremiah by way of Egypt. This was 54 years before the Viking invasion of England in 892. This is also 828 years before the Great Fire of London in 1666 AD. 1. The Vikings. 840 AD, 4734 AM. Several comets appeared at once and disturbed Chinese officials. 1. The Discoverers, Boston. 841 AD, 4735 AM. The Norse Vikings that occupied Ireland now founded the city of Dublin. 844 AD, 4738 AM. The relic stone Lia Fail, Stone of Destiny, that Irish and Scottish kings were coronated upon, was removed from the Scottish island of Iona and taken to the Scottish city of Scone, also known as Jacob's Pillow. The stone was said to have been brought to Ireland by the prophet Jeremiah in 583 BC. Also in this year, the Vikings known as the Rus, ancestors of the Russian people, attacked Seville and the Iberian Peninsula. 1. Today, tomorrow and the great beyond. 2. The Vikings. 845 AD, 4739 AM. A Danish Viking leader named Reginfred, or Ragnar Lodbrok, Hairy Breeches, led a fleet of 120 Viking ships up the Seine River, attacking everything in their path. Instead of defending the path to Paris, King Charles the Bald fled and offered the Viking leader 7,000 pounds of silver to leave, which was the first recorded instance of a Danegeld protection payment to the Danes. The Danes departed loaded with the 7,000 pounds of silver and treasures they had stolen, and on their way home, many of them fell ill and died. In this year, all foreign religions in China are outlawed, and 4,600 Buddhist temples are destroyed. This would have also resulted in the loss of China's priceless historic books. 1. The Vikings. 3. The discoverers Borston. 846 AD. The Islamic Saracens sacked the city of Rome, which is now a Christian city. This interesting year is 1776 years since Israel and Judah split in 931 BC, and 1260 years before Armageddon. Also in this year, Magnus Gracchus experiments with gunpowder. 848 AD, 4742 AM. A large Scandinavian Viking fleet landed in Ireland. Foreigners, unlike the first wave of Vikings, the Irish fell under. In this year, the dark heathens arrived, known as the Danes. Priorly, the Vikings were of the fair-haired type from Norway. The Danes moved in and conquered the settled Vikings at their base in Dublin. 1. The Vikings. 851 AD, 4745 AM. The Danes arrived in England, sailing up the Thames River with 350 warships, at least 10 to 14,000 men, to attack London. London and Canterbury were attacked, and 2 armies sent to drive off the Vikings were themselves repelled. 852 AD, 4746 AM. The city of Byzantium of the Greeks, or Constantinople, was known to the Vikings of the north called the Rus. The great metropolis inspired them with awe, and they called it Miklagard, or the Great City. The Rus Vikings were originally from Scandinavia, and in this year they attacked Constantinople. These Vikings were called the Arus by the Arabs. Later in the 13th century, Al-Watwat wrote that the religion of the Viking Rus was the same as the ancient Magi. This would link them to the descendants of the Persian-based Hebrews of the 5th and 6th centuries BC. Another Arab writer, Al-Yaqubi, referred to the Vikings called the Rus as the Majus. The Rus Vikings were the origin of those people, who later became the Russians. The Vikings in Ireland who were defeated at Dublin by the new Danish Vikings received reinforcements from Norway and attacked the Danes with 160 ships at a sea battle that lasted 3 days at Snam-Eigneck before the Danes emerged triumphant. 1. The Vikings. 856 AD, 4750 AM. An earthquake at Corinth in Greece killed 45,000 people. Another quake at Damghan, Persia, Iran, killed an estimated 200,000 people. There were many blood descendants of Israelites and Judah at both Corinth and Persia at this time. This year is 1184 years, 148 times 8, before the 2040 AD cataclysm caused by planet Phoenix that will result with higher death tolls than these at these same places. 860 AD, 4754 AM. The Rus Vikings attack Constantinople again, but are unable to breach its walls, first built by Theodosius in 413 AD, and rebuilt in 447 AD after an earthquake. Interestingly, this year was 447 years after the walls were originally constructed in 413 AD. 1. The end of empire. 861 AD, 4755 AM. The Book of the Four Masters of Ireland reveals that the Danish Vikings plundered the ancient site of Newgrange and other mound monuments. 1. Celtic myths and legends. Primitive mythology. 862 AD, 4756 AM. 1244 before Armageddon. The Irish annals of Ulster claim that the Vikings plundered Newgrange and other monuments in this year, a year discrepancy from the Book of the Four Masters. The calendrics for this year are very prominent. 622 plus 622. Enoch born in 622 AM. 1. Celtic myths and legends. 864 AD, 4758 AM. The Irish annals record that both a lunar and solar eclipse occurred in this year. The fidelity of these annals has been attacked because computations reveal that the eclipses did not occur. These researchers ignore the possibility of locally transiting objects that cast their shadow upon Earth and the Moon. As seen earlier in Chronicon 1 under 3031 BC, the number 864 is a sum that links time and space. Further, as this is 864 AD, it is also the completion of the 10th Mayan Baktun of 144,000 days, from 3113 BC, for a total of 1,440,000 days, leaving 432,000 days left to the destruction of North America in 2046 AD, and end of the Mayan long count. Further, this is 1242 years, 414 times 3, before Armageddon, and the 600th year of the Christian Coptic calendar. At this time, Arab geographer Istakri wrote of the Khazars, quote, "The Khazars do not resemble the Turks," unquote. He describes the Khazars as two distinct peoples occupying the same kingdom. Short, swarthy-skinned people like Indians, and tall, white-complected people with blue eyes and reddish hair, are people strikingly handsome. These people claim descent from the ancient Israelite tribes of Simeon and Manasseh. The Khazars adopted Judaism, which is first mentioned in 864 AD in Expositio in Matteum Evangelistam. The capital of the Khazar kingdom was Saksin, known as Saxon City. Israeli scholar Yair Davidi wrote that the nucleus of the Khazar people were the Agatharsi, and that these people had migrated from Assyria. We know that the first of the 10 tribes of Israel were deported into northern Assyria in 745 BC, and the last of the 10 tribes were deported in 721 BC, exactly 1584 years before 864 AD. One of the most famous of the early Khazar kings was named Joseph about 960 AD. 1. The Round Towers of Atlantis. 2. The meaning of Jewish history. 3. Lost Israelite identity. 865 AD, 4759 AM. As related in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the great heathen army of the Danes landed their fleet at East Anglia, England. These Vikings were led by Ivar the Boneless, Ivar Ragnarsson. This amazing Viking chieftain suffered from osteogenesis imperfecta, which made his bones soft and deformed. Ivar moved through battle protected behind a large shield with a chair carried by a huge Viking. 1. Saxons, Vikings and Celts. 867 AD, 4761 AM. The dark satellite, a lost former metallic and rocky moon of Nibiru, passed through the inner solar system. This being the Dark Ages, there are no surviving records of any sighting. It continued on its 395-year orbit. 868 AD, 4762 AM. In this year the Danes completely finished their invasion and takeover of the Saxon kingdoms of East Anglia and Northumbria. But upon attempting to invade Wessex, the Danes experienced their first defeat. The Chinese used block printing to make their Diamond Sutra text, the oldest surviving book in the world, at least the oldest of what passes for books today as opposed to scrolls or tablets. This is 40 years after the English throne was established in 828 AD. 1. Saxons, Vikings and Celts. 2. The Discoverers. 869 AD, 4763 AM. The end of the late Mayan dynasty of Tikal, an ancient pyramid city with a history dating far into the remote past. Mayan stele reveals that the line of kings that was broken in this year had endured for 552 years, starting in 317 AD. 1. The Lost Realms, Skywatchers in the Jungle, Sitchin. 871 AD, 4765 AM. A new Danish army arrived in England, providing reinforcements, and the Danes prepared to destroy the last two Saxon kingdoms, Wessex and Mercia. Mercia was invaded and fell quickly, but Wessex remained intact. King Alfred the Great collected the chronicles and records of the country and created the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. 1. Saxons, Vikings and Celts. 874 AD. The Vikings build a settlement in Iceland. This is the year 2070, 414 times 5, of the ancient Chinese calendar, that began in 1197 BC and 1080 years after 207 BC, when anarchy and civil wars tore through China. 876 AD, 4770 AM. The Vikings, led by Hrolf the Ganger from Norway, sailed up the Seine River, pillaging the French countryside. King Charles the Simple of France granted Hrolf the province of Normandy and the overlordship of Brittany. This was exactly 900 years before the descendants of both the Vikings and French people would found the United States of America with the Anglo-Saxon Celts in 1776 AD. 1. Pirates and the Lost Templar Fleet. 878 AD, 4772 AM. King Alfred of the Saxon Kingdom of Wessex was defeated by the Danes, and he escaped to Somerset. This was the 50th year since the establishment of the English throne in 828. 879 AD, 4773 AM. King Alfred required reinforcements and crushed the Danish Great Army, forcing the Vikings to surrender on the slopes of Salisbury Plain near Stonehenge. A treaty established the Danelaw territories to be occupied by the Vikings, and Wessex was not disturbed again, even when 14 years later another Danish army arrived. Wessex remained independent. 1. Saxons, Vikings and Celts. 880 AD, 4774 AM. This is an approximate time for when European chronicles and writers wrote that it was the prevailing opinion that the Arabs were the descendants of Ishmael, that the Muslims of Spain answered to kings in Babylon, Baghdad. 1. History in quotations. 885 AD, 4779 AM. The Vikings sailed up the Seine with 700 warships, 21 to 26,000 men, and innumerable other support ships in their effort to take Paris. The Great Siege of Paris occurred because the Vikings saw the city as the key to capturing the whole Frankish kingdom of Europe the Danes set to conquer. Led by Siegfried, the Danish Vikings made demands for tribute, but the demand was rejected. The siege would endure 8 months, lasting into 886. Won the Vikings. 886 AD, 4780 AM. The siege of Paris by the Danes ends, and the Vikings, weary of the protracted affair, break up into smaller bands and begin terrorising the countryside. The Rus were kin to the Danes, Vikings that at this time were founding Russian states and attacking almost all of northern Europe. In this year the Rus Vikings attacked Wessex and took some of King Alfred's territory. King Alfred attacked the Vikings occupying his country to stop them from using the Thames River in London. He succeeded, took back the city and drove off the Vikings from that area. This was the 360th year of the Anno Domini calendar. Won the Vikings. 2. A Short History of the World. 888 AD, 4782 AM. The Anunnaki planet Nibiru is at aphelion, furthest distance from the surface of the Sun, and begins its 366-year journey back toward the inner solar system since last passing over the ecliptic in 522 AD. The last time Nibiru was at aphelion was in 96 AD, when the apocalypse was put together from the ancient Greek prophecies and other texts. 892 AD, 4786 AM. A Viking named Hasting or Hastine attacked England, but was defeated by Alfred, the Saxon king of Wessex. The Vikings attacked with 250 ships, 7,500 to 10,000 men. Interestingly, this was 174 years before the Battle of Hastings between the Norman Vikings and the English in 1066 AD, 174 years being 2088 months. Won the Vikings. 893 AD, 4787 AM. A Danish fleet arrived in England to reinforce the Viking troops already occupying everything but the Saxon kingdom of Wessex. In Persia at Ardabil occurred an earthquake that killed about 150,000 people. 1. Saxons, Vikings and Celts. 896 AD, 4790 AM. Saxon King Alfred of Wessex built a navy of larger warships than those used by the Vikings, the Frisians and Danish. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, this English navy began resisting the steady stream of Viking longships passing over to England. This year was 1776 years after the Israelites built their capital city Samaria, the Viking and Saxons being descendants of these people who had migrated through the Baltic. This was 1480 years after the fall of Judah in 585 BC. 1480 years is 17,760 months. One history in quotations. 906 AD, 4800 AM. Jewish rabbi and antiquarian Saadia Gaon wrote that the underlying meaning behind the prophecy of Malachi 3:1-2 concerns a last day's messenger, a man who would, prior to the return of the Messiah, prepare the people to receive him, and that this man would be a descendant of the tribe of Joseph, Manasseh and Ephraim. This would make him either British, Scottish or American. As Ephraim was to be the second and greater of the two, he would probably be from the United States. This was 1200 years before Armageddon and return of Chief Cornerstone. 1. America and Britain, our identity revealed. 907 AD, 4801 AM. The Rus Vikings attacked Constantinople with 2,000 ships. The early Russian state was trying to force its way into the marketplace of Constantinople. 1. The Vikings. 908 AD, 4802 AM. A violent earthquake rocked northern Egypt in the region of the Great Pyramid. This was the second year of the passing of the Vials of Phoenix Comet Group. 1. Pyramid Quest. 911 AD, 4805 AM. Hrolf of Norway was also called Rollo. He sailed up the Seine in this year and blockaded it. In exchange for not attacking Paris, he was granted some land on the northwest coast, and Rollo became the first Duke of Normandy. Rollo was a gigantic man, so large that no horse could carry him. The Irish annals record the appearance of a comet. This was the 5th year of the Vials of Phoenix Comet Group. 1. Saxons, Vikings and Celts. 2. History in quotations. 3. Round Towers of Atlantis. 912 AD, 4806 AM. As Hrolf the Ganger Rollo settles many Viking families into the newly formed Dukedom of Normandy on the other side of Europe in the east, a treaty is formed between the Rus Vikings and the Greeks of Constantinople, which established the Varangian Guard. Russian groups were garrisoned in the ancient Greek city, Byzantium, as a measure of protection against the Greeks' other enemies. Interestingly, the treaty recognises that there had been peace between the Rus and the people of Constantinople 70 years before. This year was exactly 1656 years after the 10 tribes of Israel were deported into Assyria in 745 BC, and 1224 years after the start of the Greek-Syrian Seleucid calendar in 313 BC. 1. A short history of the world. 2. The Vikings. 922 AD, 4816 AM. In this year the Sufis formally branched away from Greater Islam. They were mystics and most of them departed Babylon, Baghdad, and settled in Persia, Iran, where they were tolerated. Many of the descendants of those in the Middle East have Israelite blood, as is also reflected in the calendrics. This was 2368 years after the exodus of Israel from Egypt in 1447 BC, and 2368 years is 1184 plus 1184 years, and this exodus of Muslim Sufis from Babylonia to Persia was 1184 years before Armageddon in 2106 AD. This was also the 300th year of the Islamic after Hijra calendar, Arab history, a calendar that started in a commemoration of Muhammad's exodus from persecution in one city to seek refuge in another. 1. Christ, the Power and the Passion. 927 AD, 4821 AM. The English defeated the Vikings that occupied Northumbria, the northernmost county, led by Edward's son Athelstan. Due to the political chaos, someone in this year buried a treasure of 617 coins from as far as Scandinavia, Russia and Afghanistan, along with 65 other gold and precious objects. Edward was the local Anglo-Saxon king known as Edward the Elder. This Viking treasure remained hidden for exactly 1080 years, to be rediscovered by David and Andrew Whelan in 2007 AD. 930 AD, 4824 AM. The religious epicentre of the Islamic world, Mecca, is attacked and the Kaaba is sacked. The ancient relic from the sky, a meteorite, was taken by the Carmathians, an artefact that antedates Islam in its veneration. This was a tremendous blow to the Muslim world. This was the year 666 of the Christian Coptic calendar. This year was 1242 years after the start of the Greek Seleucid calendar, and 4968 years of the orbital chronology, began in 4039 BC. 932 AD, 4826 AM. Feng Yingwang of China printed the 5 Confucian scriptures for the first time using the block printing method. 1. History in quotations. 936 AD, 4830 AM. Planet Phoenix passes through the inner solar system, completing its 138-year orbit, this being 460 years after the fall of Rome, or 5520 months, 552 being a Phoenix cycle of 4 orbits. As this was the end of the Dark Ages, there are no surviving records of a sighting. Phoenix crossed the ecliptic in May, but Earth may have been at this time too far along its orbital path. 938 AD, 4832 AM. An admixture of Slavic and Turkish peoples passed through Germany, France and northern Italy, plundering and sending the locals fleeing. The Slavic population of Eastern and Central Europe earned their name because they had been carried off as slaves over and over again. In the words of the historian Robert Ferguson, quote, "Their ethnicity became synonymous with their fate and the word slave passed into the English language as a generic term," unquote. The Israelites began as slaves in Egypt, and the fate reoccurred in the histories of their descendants. As Cimmerians taken into Assyria from Samaria in 745 BC, they were to those of the Near East the Galutha or prisoners. These were the Goths and Gauls, peoples related by blood to the Slavs. The Gauls of southern France and the Slavs of Asia Minor were kin. According to Procopius, the Gauls and Slavs had the same national characteristics. Quote, "They from the most ancient times have been under a democracy," unquote. Reverend H. J. Warner in 1922 AD wrote that the Gauls of southern France and the people of Slavonia were, quote, "in constant communication," unquote. In the year 1407 BC, or 2488 Annus Mundi, the Israelites invaded Canaan and became a nation with a national homeland. This year of the Slav-Turkish invasions, 938 AD, was exactly 4976 years, or 2488 plus 2488 years, after Earth entered its present orbit around the Sun in 4039 BC. 1. A short history of the world. 2. The Vikings. 3. The Albigensian heresy. 941 AD, 4835 AM. Igor the Russian attacked Constantinople and terrorized the countryside. The Greek armies were elsewhere on campaign and were recalled back where they surrounded the Russians. The Greeks used their secret state and naval weapon, Greek fire, burning the Viking ships. 1. The Vikings. 2. Technology of the gods. 954 AD, 4848 AM. In the 126th year of the founding of the Anglo-Saxon throne of England, in 828 AD, Edred, brother of the king, Athelstan of Wessex, defeated the occupying Vikings of York and drove off Eric Bloodaxe. This ended the Scandinavian power in England. York was a major Atlantic port with visitors from as far as Samarkand, New Samaria. Archaeologists have found shells brought by people from the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. This was 2400 years, 600 times 4, after the exodus of Israel in 1447 BC, and 1200 years, 600 times 2, after the Parthians of partial Israelite descent founded the Parthian dynasty over Babylon in 247 BC. Further, this was 2592 years, 864 times 3, after Jacob died in Israel in 1639 BC, and adopted Manasseh and Ephraim, the tribe of Joseph. This year was 666 years to 1620 AD, when the descendants of the Anglo-Saxons known as the English Puritans were going to sail to North America and land at Plymouth Rock. 1. The Vikings. 960 AD, 4854 AM. The Song dynasty of China began. Double harvesting techniques in China would double the population quickly. 962 AD, 4856 AM. The Holy Roman Empire of Germany began with Otto I, King of Germany, and son of Henry the Fowler. He was crowned as emperor by Pope John XII at Nuremberg, the start of a dynasty beginning with the first Saxon emperor. For the next 9 centuries, the civil power of Germany will contend with the assumed religious powers of Rome over civil Germany. This was 408 years, 4896 months, after the imperial restoration of the Roman Empire by Justinian in 554 AD. This was 2600 years, 52 jubilees, after 1639 BC, when Jacob, Israel, adopted Manasseh and Ephraim in Egypt, 2 tribes that would later migrate far west and become the Germanic nations. 967 AD, 4861 AM. Renowned Arabic scholar Masudi died, preserver of many old Arabian, Greek, Egyptian, Syrian and Coptic traditions concerning the Great Pyramid and its antediluvian origin. 969 AD, 4863 AM. The Egyptian community of Al-Qahira, Cairo, becomes a city founded by the Fatimid general Jawhar al-Siqili, who was called Al-Qahira, the Conqueror. The city was originally about 6 miles away from the Great Pyramid of Giza, but the growth of the city brought it to the edge of the pyramid complex. 976 AD, 4870 AM. Zhang Sun of China built a clock that occupied a 30-foot tall tower that rang bells, beat drums, and had little doors that popped open revealing signs that showed the time. Other moving parts showed the sun, moon and planets. 1. Technology of the gods. 981 AD, 4875 AM. Eric the Red is outlawed and exiled from Norway for murder or manslaughter. He fled to Iceland, to the settlement of Haukadal. Again he is outlawed for manslaughter and relocates to the town of Bridafjord. Again he is banished for killings, this time for 3 years. He set sail westward with a crew, searching for a land rumoured to have been seen at a distance by a storm-driven sailor, Gunbjorn of Norway. He discovered it and named it Greenland. This is the more popular date for founding of colony of Greenland. 1. The Discoverers, Borsten. 986 AD, 4880 AM. A Viking navigator named Bjarni Herjolfsson accidentally sailed too far in dense fog, trying to locate Eric's colony. He discovered continental North America. 1. The Discoverers, Borsten.